Chapter 101. Should I let him finish his words? Darren is very familiar with the technology of Germa 66. When he was in the North Sea, he used his flesh to test the power of Germa's military technology weapons. Electric shock, fire, heavy punches, rocket bombardment. These powerful weapons that are extremely powerful and easy to kill for ordinary people are just a part of Darren's regular training. Although Quinn claims to have mastered the military weapon technology of Germa 66, in fact, his scientific research strengths are not in weapon manufacturing, but in human mechanical colonization and artificial synthesis of deadly infectious viruses. Damn guy, why is my attack useless to you? Quinn, whose head is embedded in a deep pit in the ground, screamed breathlessly, staring at Darren with bloodshot eyes in disbelief. Obviously I am the animal type. Boom. As soon as the words fell, Quinn's neck, which was as long as a plesiosaur, suddenly shrank, dragging his huge body and spiraling towards Darren and Barrett at high speed. The huge body rolled up a majestic gust of wind, and Barrett grinned. Let me do it. His eyes burst into a crazy fighting spirit, and he instantly activated the ability of the fusion fruit. The soil, sand, and steel fragments on the ground crawled up like living things, spreading around his body, and instantly formed a 3-meter-long giant arm at the gap of his broken arm. Swish. The purple-black armed color domineering covered it, showing an extremely hard metal coldness. The golden long hair danced wildly, and Barrett gritted his teeth and roared. You damn fat man, I have tolerated you for a long time. A punch. Fusion super cannon. Boom. Like a heavy punch from a mortar bombardment, it hit Quinn's belly squarely. With the exaggerated domineering and power bursting out at the same time, the round belly wrapped in black and white overalls rippled like waves. Bang! Under the heavy blow, Quinn's body immediately bent like a cooked shrimp, and a circle of white air waves exploded on his back. Quinn's face suddenly turned pale, as if he was hit hard, and large amounts of blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. He let out a painful wail, and his body rolled wildly on the ground, rolling up countless dust. But he didn't care about these at all, and his pupils suddenly shrank to the smallest degree. In the reflection of his pupils, a military boot wrapped with armed color domineering has been raised and stepped on his head brazenly. Damn it, how could I lose to you two guys? Quinn roared, and his eyes quickly gathered a strange red light. Bew. A bunch of red beam bullets were shot out like a storm, causing a huge explosion on the spot. Boom. The red flames were swaying and roaring, and black smoke was pouring out. The next moment, Darren and Barrett both shot out from the thick smoke at the same time and landed steadily. They blew out the remaining flames on their bodies, put the seriously injured and unconscious senior on the ground behind them, squinted at Quinn who stood up again in the black smoke in the distance, and raised a sneer at the corner of their mouths. What a tough guy. Although I'm injured and tortured, and my strength is not as good as it was in my prime, this little reptile can still stand up after taking my full-strength punch. Barrett said with admiration, and his rock arm continued to crack, and then large pieces fell off, and finally only the size of a normal arm remained. 5 rough rock fingers moved their joints, and a prosthetic limb synthesized using the power of the fusion fruit filled the defect of the broken arm. Darren glanced at him and said with a teasing smile. Can it be used? If not, I'll make you a metal arm. Barrett's mouth twitched, and he remembered the big loss he suffered when they first met. He said unhappily. You should keep that kind of thing for yourself. I hate metal. He clenched the new arm, felt the power in it, and said slowly. Although it's a bit uncomfortable, it's enough if it's wrapped with domineering. Darren smiled and turned his eyes to Quinn who was shaking his head in the smoke again. His eyes gradually became murderous. That guy is an animal-type devil fruit ability user, with amazing physical defense and recovery ability. It's not so easy to kill. Give him the last blow, and then prepare to retreat, Barrett. Barrett was silent for a while after hearing this, and clenched his fists unwillingly. Okay. He is a man who will never let go of a grudge. Although the fat man in overalls has brought him a lot of strength improvement, Barrett can't easily forget the pain and torture of imprisonment and virus injection. However, this place is the base camp of the Beast's pirates. Kaido and Jin may return at any time. If they delay too long, their escape plan will be in vain. Retreat. At this time, Quinn's hoarse voice suddenly came from the billowing black smoke. Bang! He took a step forward, and the ground shook dully. The huge body crushed out the air wave, blowing away the thick smoke instantly. The upright Brachiosaurus stood there panting, staring at his experimental subject with bloodshot eyes, and roared angrily. Do you think you can escape from here? The huge sound wave spread out, as if shaking the entire island. You destroyed an arsenal, killed so many members of the pirate group, and messed up our base camp. Today, no matter what, I will crush you into pieces and kill you all. Quinn, in the form of a human beast, suddenly leaned forward, half lying on the ground with his limbs on the ground, making a posture of a beast pouncing on its food and about to charge. Crack, crack. He slowly opened his bloody mouth full of sharp teeth. The metal mechanical arm also unfolded suddenly, and a black gun barrel appeared in the steel clamp. The huge tail with distinct metal components also shook and swung, and the tail end opened into the shape of a gun barrel. Mouth, arms, tail. At the same time, a suffocating dark yellow light rose. The dazzling light particles gathered madly, and the destructive aura that spread out made everyone present feel cold on their backs. That's the move. Even the mechanical arm and tail are used. Those three guys are dead. Except for Lord Kaido, no one can stop this move of Boss Quinn. The members of the Beast Pirates who were lying on the ground, watching the battle, in the distance saw this scene and burst into exclamations and cheers. However, what no one saw was that facing this deterrent scene, the face of the Navy became particularly strange. Barrett's mouth twitched, glanced at Darren, and stepped back 2 steps silently. Ha 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 ha. Be annihilated under the artillery fire of this genius Quinn, stupid guy. Escape. Quinn laughed loudly, rampant. Don't be kidding. I'm. 3 dark yellow beams converged to the extreme. Epidemic, Kui, A faint blue arc flashed in the air, and the tail and arms that had been transformed by metal suddenly closed irregularly. Quinn. His expression froze for a moment, and his smile froze on his face. Boom. The flames instantly engulfed his figure and everything within 100 meters. A huge explosion exploded on the spot, turning into a huge fireball that rushed into the sky. Darren slowly put down his fingers, scratched his head a little embarrassedly, and said, "Should I let him finish his words?" Barrett. Many pirates in the distance were dumbfounded. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 102. The same drama. The majestic flames seemed to turn into a fireball that covered the sky and spread out on the ground. The extremely high temperature burned the mottled and cracked ground with crackling sounds, and the heat wave that came in made all the pirates who were looking around fall to the ground in fear. The leaping flames reflected their pale, frozen, and terrified faces very clearly. Ah! Seeing this scene, a scarlet murderous intent flashed in Barrett's eyes. Quinn was already seriously injured. If he took the initiative at this time, he would most likely kill him directly to vent the anger and unwillingness of being tortured during this period. He took a deep breath, the muscles of his feet tightened, but a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder from the side. No, Barrett, we have to go. Barrett was stunned and turned his head away. I saw a weak arc suddenly jumping between Darren's fingers. As the invisible magnetic field unfolded, among the countless pirate corpses lying on the battlefield around, a handful of weapons and guns suddenly flew upside down, twisted, melted, and reorganized quickly in midair. And then gathered into a silver streamlined arc, floating in front of the two. Darren threw the unconscious senior on the arc with one hand, and just as he was about to step on it, a thunderous and furious roar suddenly came from the distant sky. Darren, Barrett, you two damn guys, how dare you! The roar was deafening, and it set off a raging wind and flashing thunder between the sky and the earth. Barrett's face changed, and his pupils suddenly shrank. This voice is Kaido. He's back. Barrett subconsciously looked up and saw a huge black shadow swimming in the sea of clouds in the distance, constantly expanding. The wind and thunder accompanied the giant forward, interweaving and deriving unscrupulously, constantly flashing. That's A dragon. It's Lord Kaido. Great. Lord Kaido is back. Now those two guys are dead. Quote. Quote, quote. Seeing the strange phenomenon of the sky changing color, the pale faces of the beast's pirates in the distance once again showed excitement, and they couldn't help shouting. Suddenly, a sharp explosion sounded from behind the clouds, as if it was the hissing of some extremely sharp blade cutting the air. Bad wind! Exclamation mark quote. Before the shadows arrived, huge dark green wind blades had already torn through the clouds, covering the two of them like an overwhelming force. Here they come. Darren's eyes shone, and he reacted quickly, raising one arm suddenly. Countless metals were reconstructed into a hemispherical steel shield in front of him, and a layer of dark luster instantly covered its surface, wrapping the two of them. Facing Kaido's bad wind that could easily cut through the city walls and tear open the earth, Darren did not hesitate at all, and directly added armed color domineering to the metal defense layer. Clang 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 clang. The wind blades fell like a rainstorm, and after hitting the metal shield, countless sparks splashed, leaving shocking cuts on it. Crackling. There were more and more cuts and cracks, and as the last wind blade fell, it was shattered into countless fragments. Among the scattered metal fragments, the dragon finally poked out its mountain-sized head from the gloomy and heavy sea of clouds. After seeing the tragic situation of its base camp and the countless corpses on the ground, its vertical pupils were instantly filled with hideous bloodshot, and indescribable rage filled them, staring at Darren and Barrett on the ground. Unforgivable. The dragon roared and suddenly opened its bloody mouth with sharp teeth, and took a deep breath. Its belly swelled up instantly, and the hot flames in its mouth quickly gathered into a terrifying fireball. Damn it! It's that trick again. Barrett's pupils shrank. The bastard Kaido used this trick to create chaos and created an opportunity to capture him and Darren alive. It's just, the same drama will not be performed twice. He suddenly grinned, and the pitch-black armament hockey wrapped around his arms like an invisible armor. Barrett, leave Kaido to me, watch out behind. The indifferent voice of the Commodore suddenly sounded. Barrett was stunned, and his sight swept through the smoke-filled sky, and soon locked onto a black shadow that flew out from behind the dragon and swooped down from the flank, bypassing the smoke. The slender black wings ignited red flames in midair, and glided down from the sky at an incredibly amazing speed. The second in command of the beast's pirates, the big boss, Flame Disaster, Jin. Animal System Katakana middle dot Dragon Dragon Fruit Katakana middle dot Ancient Species Katakana middle dot Pterosaur Form. The pterosaur suddenly pulled its head back tightly like a slingshot, as if it was stretched to the extreme, ready to go. Its target was the one who was firmly protecting them behind them, the metal arc that rose up. Attack from the front and back. Darren, you bastard, I'm not your subordinate, why should I obey your orders? Barrett gritted his teeth and roared unwillingly, but his body subconsciously obeyed the command of the Commodore. He took a step forward from where he was, and countless rocks, sand and steel on the ground under his feet instantly wrapped his body, rising from the ground into a 10-meter-high giant. Merge. The giant exuding awe-inspiring majesty waved his huge arms and slammed heavily at the pterosaur in the sky. The air was directly pierced by the giant's exaggerated power, and circles of white air waves burst out. At the moment of swinging his fist, Barrett heard a crisp sound behind him at the same time. Buzz. That was the sound of a coin being bounced into the air by the thumb. The fierce wind blew his black hair, and Darren stood proudly in place, aiming the rotating coin at the dragon's mouth filled with flames. The whole dark hellish world, with rocks flying everywhere, seemed to freeze at this moment. The giants transformed by Darren and Barrett stood back to back, facing their respective opponents with fighting spirit. The next moment. Boom. The red flames spewed out of the dragon's mouth, the blue electromagnetic beam cannons erupted in the hands of the Navy. The pterosaur ejected a golden shock wave like a laser, and the murderous giant grinned and swung a heavy fist like a meteorite. Each of them collided in midair. With a bang. Hot breath. Magnetic overload Katakana middle dot super electromagnetic cannon. Diao Zizunwang. Medium bullet Katakana middle dot super cannon. The world was silent for a moment. Boom. Boom. Two earth-shattering explosions exploded instantly, and the mighty shock waves spread out in all directions in the sky unstoppably. Countless members of the 100 Beasts pirates were unable to react at all. They only felt that the world in front of them was suddenly occupied by dazzling white, and the whole person was blown away. The whole island wailed under the heavy burden, and it shook violently as if a magnitude 10 earthquake had erupted. One after another, deep cracks continued to spread out, and the earth was like an ocean, and the offshore sea surface swept up tens of meters high waves. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. Please give me everything, thank you very much. Chapter 103 Combined Attack Technique. The surging air waves expanded and contracted and expanded. Red-hot breath, blue electromagnetic cannon, golden laser impact, giant black heavy fist. The impact air waves of various colors collided wildly in the sky, interweaving to derive violent airflow, and the flames rolled and fell on the cracked earth. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the air waves derived from the explosion suddenly spread. The surface of the oppressive giant was covered with cracks and suddenly disintegrated. Barrett jumped out of it and landed heavily like a cannonball, smashing a deep pit in the ground, with a bloody mark oozing from the corner of his mouth. The figure of the pteranodon was blown away by the bursting air wave, and red flames ignited on its body. It smashed directly into the deep rock wall of the distant mountain range, raising a dust column tens of meters high. Darren's face turned pale, and his body staggered back 2 steps. At this time, Kaido's furious voice like thunder sounded from above his head. "You two guys." Darren and Barrett's faces changed slightly, and they raised their heads and looked at the sky. The huge black shadow that almost covered the sky in the sea of clouds had disappeared, and only billowing smoke and flames were lingering in the sky. The next moment, a burly demon-like figure crashed through the smoke and flames like a meteorite falling from the sky, falling towards Darren and Barrett at an extremely terrifying speed. The knotted arms covered with green dragon scales tightly grasped a huge spiked mace. Kaido, who had transformed into a dragon man, roared with bloodshot eyes, and his long black hair fluttered wildly in the wind. Dead. Countless black and red lightning burst out from Kaido's body, as if turning into a bunch of gorgeous and dangerous fireworks, surrounding the mace and the 8 fasting. The majestic and boundless domineering aura crushed down like an overwhelming force. The entanglement of domineering aura. At this moment, an indescribable sense of oppression came over, as if suffocating. Dalen's eyes burst out with dazzling and fiery arrogance, and he laughed violently. "Barrett, now! I told you not to give me orders." Barrett roared, and the killing intent on his body rose again. Without any exchange of glances, the 2 men took action at the same time. The ground under their feet collapsed half a meter, and they flew up from the original place like a cannonball in the same way. "Arm!" The 2 men shouted at the same time, and the solemn, dark, and extremely cold armed color domineering wrapped around their arms at the same time. Their eyes were filled with indescribable madness and arrogance. The hearty killing and challenge were written all over their bloody faces. Countless times of near-death training in the past 7 days, suffering the painful torture of Quinn's terrible virus, sparring with the body on the verge of collapse. Whether it is Darren or Barrett, the anger and desire that have been suppressed for a long time in their hearts are all vented at this moment, and they can't be restrained at all. They want to experience it for themselves. At this moment, they are still far away from the monster Kaido. How far is the distance? From bottom to top, facing the stick of Kaido, the beast, they punched out at the same time. Descending the 3rd world, inducing Naraku. Combined attack technique, splitting the country. Boom. The huge mace wrapped with black and red lightning and the 2 fists wrapped in black domineering, heavily collided in midair, like a comet hitting the earth, and an overwhelming air wave burst out in an instant. The roaring black and red thunder spread out, ravaging the void in the earth, making the entire void between heaven and earth seem to become distorted, blurred, and constantly torn and intertwined. The huge shock wave pressed the earth to collapse continuously, and the buildings and prisons were swallowed by the spreading cracks at the same time. How is this possible? In the rock wall of the distant mountain range, the flame disaster, Jin, who had restored his human form and was covered in black, walked out of the deep pit of the rock wall. Looking at the three figures stuck in midair in the distance, the eyes under the black mask were filled with disbelief, a drop of cold sweat slowly slid down his forehead, and he murmured in a low voice. The combination of those two guys actually blocked Brother Kaido's full-strength attack. On the other side, on the mottled ground like ruins, Quinn, who was covered in black smoke and had his arms and tail in pieces, also looked at the scene in the distance with a dull face, his eyes bulging, his tongue sticking out, and his chin almost falling to the ground. This is impossible. In the air, Kaido's domineering aura and the momentum of Darren and Barrett's joint outbreak were violently crushing each other, forming two cyclones of completely different colors. Kaido, holding the mace, suddenly exerted force, trying to smash the mace down. But the next second he was stunned, his pupils contracted, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. How come these two guys are so much stronger than they were a few days ago? This is incredible. I didn't do anything these days, I just put them in prison, and Quinn was in charge of their supervision and disposal. Wait. Quinn. Kaido's pupils, which had turned blood red due to his rage, suddenly shrank, and he turned his head sharply to stare at the fat man in overalls who was burned all over in the distance, and roared. Quinn, you idiot, what on earth did you do? Hearing his big brother's angry scolding, Quinn was confused. What did he do? In addition to embezzling some supplies, singing and dancing and sleeping with women from time to time, he didn't do anything these days. I was conscientious and regularly tortured those two guys with viruses, making them want to live but not to die. Seeing Quinn's aggrieved expression, Kaido was so angry that he almost vomited blood. At this time, the stalemate of the three finally reached its limit. With a loud bang, a vast shock wave burst out, and Kaido flew out backwards. Darren and Barrett turned pale, spitting blood from their mouths, and sank into the ground together. The rolling dust and smoke kept rolling, twisting and covering everyone's vision. Kaido's feet plowed a groove of dozens of meters on the ground, and he stopped steadily, holding the mace in one hand and panting slightly. Suddenly, an almost invisible blue arc flashed in the void. Kaido was startled, his eyes were instantly covered with hideous bloodshot, and he turned his head away. No. In the direction of the arsenals in the distance, a faint blue arc suddenly passed over the surface of the huge black chimneys. Then, crack, 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 the towering black chimneys, all twisted and compressed into twists. The collapse followed, and the unvented high temperature immediately detonated the furnace below. Boom. It was as if a string of super-large hanging cannons were completely ignited. In Kaido's furious roar, the arsenal buildings that had cost countless resources and manpower and material resources to build with great difficulty, as the largest resource base of the beast's pirates, all exploded. A huge group of fireballs covering the sky soared into the sky. In the swaying sea of fire, the collapse of the arsenal furnace, gunpowder and munitions successively exploded twice, turning into a bunch of magma-like flames that sprayed out. The whole island turned into a hell on earth at this moment, and the raging fire completely dyed the dim world scarlet. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 104 Kaido. Hand over Darren. The whole world seemed to have turned into a pantomime at this moment. The dark red flames illuminated the pale and terrified faces. All the members of the Beast Pirates stared at the collapsing arsenal buildings in the distance with horror and amazement, and at the beams of molten steel and magma splashing out from the explosion, their hearts were filled with huge waves. It's over. Our resources. All are destroyed. How could this be? Our military factory. Unprecedented fear instantly occupied their brains. The pirates stood in the wind filled with gunpowder-like statues without souls, motionless. Some people even couldn't control themselves, kneeling on the ground trembling all over. Damn it! How is this possible? Jin punched hard on the mountain wall, creating a hole, and his pupils trembled continuously. What is the core of the beast's pirates? In addition to the three core figures of Kaido, Jin and Quinn, the most important resource is the huge arms production line built on this island. Unlike the power of Big Katakana Mom, which is based on blood relationship and established through continuous marriage, their beast's pirates take the route of expanding military resources. It can be said without hesitation that the 10 arsenals built on this island are the lifeblood of the beast's pirates. But now, all the most important things are burned in an instant. The accumulation and hard work of so many years in the past. Completely destroyed. It's over now. Boss Kaido will definitely twist my head off. Quinn in the distance was pale, the fat on his face was shaking constantly, and he held his head madly. In the center of the battlefield, Kaido stood there in a daze, his bloodshot pupils reflected the collapsed arsenal buildings, and hideous blue veins gradually covered his forehead. Ah! He suddenly raised his head and roared, and countless black and red lightning burst out from his body in an instant, almost sweeping the entire island. Unprecedented violent anger, like boiling magma, the pressure from the legendary creatures made everyone pale. Darren, Barrett, you two damn guys. Kaido finally came back to his senses from this huge shock, holding the mace in his hand, and turned his head suddenly, trying to find the traces of the two ignorant bastards. But when he turned around, he was surprised to find that Darren and Barrett had disappeared. Including the small silver ark, it disappeared from the spot. Kaido immediately opened his observation haki perception and finally found their traces in the smoke-filled sky. On the ark that shuttled high in the sky at high speed, Darren and Barrett had blood flowing from their mouths, and were sneering at him from afar. Goodbye Kaido, thank you for your hospitality during this period. Darren, who had been severely injured, panted slightly, with a sneer on his face. If you hadn't brought me back, I really couldn't destroy the base camp of your beast pirates. By the way. He moved his eyes to Quinn on the other side, and said something with a teasing smile that made Quinn look confused. Thank you for your care, fatty in overalls. After the voice fell, before Kaido and the others could react, blue arcs jumped on Darren's fingertips. In an instant, the nearly boiling magnetic field suddenly rioted, pushing the metal arc with violent acceleration, breaking through the sound barrier in an instant, and disappeared in the distant sky in the blink of an eye. Seeing this scene, Kaido's eyes almost cracked, and his teeth creaked. He slammed his stick into the ground, creating a bottomless crack in the ground, and a thunderous roar resounded through the sky at this moment. No matter where you escape. One day I will kill you. Darren, Barrett. He did not choose to transform into a dragon in vain to chase after them. Although Kaido did have the ability to fly after the transformation, his speed could not be compared with Darren's magnetic field acceleration that easily broke through the sound barrier. Even if he turned into a dragon, he could not catch up with those two guys. And Kaido also knew that the most important thing at the moment was to implement measures as much as possible to save the production line of the arsenal as much as possible. Brother Kaido. A black shadow quickly fell from the sky and turned into a tall figure, standing firmly beside Kaido. The black wings slowly folded, and Jin said solemnly. Although a secondary explosion was triggered, if rescue is carried out, it may be possible to save some production lines. Kaido took a deep breath and nodded. He turned his eyes and stared at Quinn who was sneaking over, and said in a fierce voice. Quinn, what happened? Didn't I ask you to keep an eye on those two guys? They were obviously shackled with seastone, how could they escape? The uncontrollable anger spewed out of Kaido's nostrils, and the gloom in his tone made Quinn tremble all over. That, Boss Kaido, I didn't do anything. Quinn was so scared that he looked like he was about to cry, and he didn't dare to look at Kaido. I have tortured them to death with all kinds of newly developed viruses. But for some reason, someone sneaked into our base camp, created an explosion, and stole the key to the shackles. Kaido raised his eyebrows. But at this moment, boom boom. A dull bombardment suddenly came from the distant port, and continuous explosions burst out one after another, with a lot of flames. What's the matter? Kaido and Jin's eyes were stern. Report, Lord Kaido. It's the Navy. A pirate staggered through the smoke in fear and ran over, trembling. The Navy is coming. Navy. Under the black mask, Jin's pupils shrank slightly. How did the Navy find this island? Is there a traitor in our beast's pirates? The leading Navy general who is the leader? In an instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Soon the strong wind dispersed the billowing black smoke, and the scene of the distant port became clear. I saw a warship firing madly with an unstoppable momentum, breaking through the waves and charging towards their base camp. The heavy guns on the hull were spitting out flames madly, bombing the members of the beast pirates stationed in the port and making them run around with their heads in their hands. On the bow of the warship, a burly figure with short purple hair, his hands folded across his chest, his eyes wearing sunglasses locked on them with a sense of oppression. The white and white cloak of justice behind him danced wildly in the strong wind. A low, sharp roar came from afar. Kaido, hand over my student Darren. Please everything, thank you very much. Chapter 105 Who do you think I am? Kaido, hand over my student Darren. The powerful and sharp voice came from the warship on the sea, revealing a domineering and oppressive feeling. As soon as the voice fell, the members of the beast pirates turned pale. When they saw the appearance of the burly figure, they couldn't help but exclaimed in horror. It's Zephyr, former admiral of the Navy. Black Arm, Zephyr. The legendary Navy. Hasn't he retired to the second line? Why is he going to sea again? It's over, we're done now. Zephyr, former admiral of the Navy headquarters, the highest combat power of the world government. Because of his powerful armed color domineering, the world calls him Black Arm. He has experienced hundreds of battles and made outstanding achievements. He was once a feared existence for countless pirates. The back of the purple short-haired man was the flag that countless young Navy officers followed to the death on the battlefield. Hand over, Darren. Hearing Zephyr's words, Kaido's eyes were instantly filled with ferocious bloodshot. He glanced at the unstoppable warship, then at the arsenal buildings that were constantly collapsing and causing explosions in the distance behind him, and then glanced at the mottled base island with corpses all over the ground in front of him. A pair of bloodshot eyeballs gradually bulged, as if they were about to spit out fire. He gritted his teeth tightly, his chest rose and fell rapidly, and the black and red lightning on the mace kept jumping. Oh! Kaido suddenly laughed crazily, his whole body twitched, and even tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. Interesting. Really interesting. You actually want me to hand over that brat. The arms production line that was built with great difficulty was completely destroyed. Countless members of the pirate group under his command were killed or injured. And the two ignorant brats who committed such a crime mocked him to the extreme, and then escaped from his hands lightly. But in the end, your navy actually came to me to ask for people. Oh, I'm really laughing to death. Kaido found that he couldn't control his laughter at all, and his whole body couldn't help shaking. He felt that the world in front of him suddenly became so absurd. Seeing this scene, Quinn next to him subconsciously shrank his head and took a step back tremblingly. It's over, Kaido is going to explode. He knew Kaido's temper very well, and he looked like he was about to explode. The flame disaster, Jin next to him said solemnly. Brother Kaido, now is not the time to go to war with the Navy. Hearing Jin's reminder, Kaido's face changed and he gritted his teeth. He took a deep breath, forced his head to calm down, and shouted towards the port. Zeph, your student has escaped. Zeph on the warship was stunned when he heard this, and then he said angrily. How is it possible? Kaido, do you think I am a fool? I believe you so easily. Darren is a devil fruit user, you must have been shackled with seastone, it is impossible for him to escape from the base camp of your beast's pirates. Could Darren, who was shackled with seastone, escape from your heavily guarded imprisonment, and then escape from the siege of so many of you? Are you beast's pirates such a waste? Don't joke. Zeph didn't believe Kaido's words at all, just thinking that he was confusing himself and delaying time. But what he didn't see was that as he spoke one sentence after another, Kaido's face became uglier and uglier, and finally as black as the bottom of a pot. Zeph, you damn bastard. Kaido finally couldn't hold back the boiling anger in his heart and roared. Quinn, who was beside him, changed his expression drastically, hugged his arm in panic, and said frantically. Boss Kaido, don't be impulsive, that's the former admiral of the Navy, Zephyr the Black Arm. The teacher of that bastard Darren. Darren's strength has skyrocketed to this level in just a few days, and he can even block the full force of Boss Kaido by joining forces with Barrett. Then how strong is his teacher? The legendary Navy, Black Arm, Zephyr. Quinn felt a little chilly when he thought about it, and his fat face was covered with cold sweat. IWE should retreat first. After all, it has been delayed for so long that the arms production line on the island is probably beyond rescue. He persuaded with sweat on his forehead. Unexpectedly, Kaido grabbed his overalls with one hand and pulled him in front of him. A pair of blood-red vertical pupils stared at him and said angrily, "Who do you think I am?" "Just a former admiral of the Navy. Follow me." Move towards the warship. Kaido was so furious that he could hardly contain himself. The fact that he let that bastard Darren destroy the base and escape from his hands was already infuriating enough. The Navy still wanted him to hand over his people. How dare they? He was just a former admiral of the Navy. He could easily stop him by himself. Not to mention that he had Jin under his command. He was good at fighting. But just as Kaido finished speaking, another earth-shaking bombardment came from the other side of the island. "Kaido, hand over Darren, the Commodore of the Navy headquarters. I will spare your life." The pupils of Jin and Quinn both shrank and they turned their heads to look. On the distant sea, another Navy ship was coming against the wind. On the bow of the ship, a man with a black afro and black-framed glasses shouted calmly. Behind the man, a tall and unrefined figure was stroking his chin with a smile. The Admiral of the Navy headquarters. Buddha's warring states. The world government's highest combat power. Why is he here too? And that's the monster of the Navy. Borsalino. Damn it. 2 admiral-level combat powers. The pirates made horrified sounds and gasped at the same time, unable to believe their eyes. Kaido's heart suddenly jumped when he saw Sengoku appear. One Zephyr is already troublesome enough, if there is another Sengoku. A bad sense of crisis gradually spread in his heart. Kaido boss, should we still go over? Quinn asked cautiously with his mouth trembling and his face as pale as ash. Kaido was stunned, and looked at the countless subordinates who had come over and looked at him. His expression gradually became ferocious when he thought of his bold words just now. He bit his back teeth and almost broke them. Nonsense. Who do you think I am? Darren destroyed our base camp, his teacher Zephyr came to ask for people, and even Sengoku came to join in the fun. Let's fight. It's just 2 admirals. Jin, stop Zephyr. Jin's mouth twitched slightly, and he silently pressed the hilt of the knife at his waist. Kaido held the mace tightly, staring at Sengoku, and muttered coldly. 2 generals can still fight. Boom. A huge shell fell from the sky, and a huge column of fire exploded on the ground not far away. Ha 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 ha. Kaido, hand over my adjutant. Otherwise, I will kill and roast you, my little reptile, today. A hearty laugh suddenly came from the sea. The moment he heard this voice, Kaido's face finally changed drastically, and his heart began to beat wildly. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 106. You actually ganged up on me. This voice. Kaido's pupils shrank into pinholes, his heart began to beat wildly, and a drop of cold sweat oozed out of his forehead. Jin and Quinn, who were beside him, were immediately silent, and they only felt a deep and piercing chill surging from the soles of their feet, spreading along the spine all the way up, and rushing straight into their foreheads. The strong wind blew away the thick smoke, and through the swaying flames, they finally saw the scene on the sea in the distance. To the left, there was a medium-sized warship that had already crashed into the port. Zephyr was leading the way, leading a large number of seamen. The army landed on the island and launched an attack with great momentum. On the right, the warships where Sengoku and Borsalino were located were cruising fast, surrounding them, and constantly firing in their direction. In the middle, was a peculiarly shaped doghead warship. On the doghead decoration of the warship, a shadowy figure stood there, wearing a doghead hat, swinging his hands like a windmill, laughing and throwing shells at the island. The continuous explosions blew away countless pirates who had no time to escape. It's Garp. The legendary Navy. The strongest marine. Hero, Garp. Why is he here too? How is this possible? Quote. The members of the beast's pirates were pale-faced, and they held their heads with their hands, screaming. The shells fell densely, and continuous explosions and flames burst out on the ground. Kaido's face was extremely gloomy at this time, and he roared furiously in his heart. What the hell is going on? Isn't Darren, that kid, just a Commodore? How could these three bastards come to rescue him at the same time? So what is Darren's identity? Is he a celestial dragon? Even those pigs probably don't get such treatment. Kaido bit his teeth hard, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was holding back a lot of anger in his heart. Forget about Sengoku and Zephyr. Although these two guys are powerful, they are not enough to make him feel scared. But Garp. Kaido couldn't help but recall some long-lost memories in his mind. They were scenes from the Battle of God Valley. When he was a little devil trainee in the Rocks Pirates, he saw with his own eyes the captain who was as strong as a ghost, being defeated by the blood-soaked dog-headed vice-admiral, and the latter killing the sky and the earth in the battle. These shadow-like memories kept flashing in his mind, causing a layer of cold sweat to seep out of Kaido's palm holding the mace unconsciously. Ha 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 ha. Darren, where are you? I'm here to pick you up. Garp on the dog-head warship laughed and looked around, but he didn't see Darren. He stared at Kaido with dissatisfaction. Kaido, hand Darren over quickly. He is my adjutant. Zeph and Sengoku on the other two warships stopped their actions, turned their heads and angrily retorted. No, Darren is my adjutant. *2. Garp laughed. Really? Then let's make a bet. Whoever rescues Darren first will be his adjutant. Who wants to bet with you? *2. Zeph and Sengoku said in unison, arguing with red faces. I heard it right. 3 legendary Navy officers are vying to make Darren their adjutant. The fat on Quinn's face trembled, his face full of disbelief. As if he remembered something, his eyes lit up, and he muttered in a low voice. This time, Boss Kaido has stirred up a hornet's nest in the Navy. Darren can't be touched. So you can't blame me this time. I can only say that the boss caught the wrong person, and it's Boss Kaido who should take the blame. Boom. A huge mace suddenly fell, smashing his head into the ground, leaving only his lower body in black and white suspenders exposed, and his 2 big fat legs hanging upside down in the air twitching. Shut up. Kaido, twisting the mace, panted with red eyes. Jin said with a serious face. Brother Kaido, what should we do now? That Garp was the god of the valley. That was back then. Kaido angrily interrupted Jin's words. He glanced at the sea, then looked at his subordinates who were trembling around him, and gritted his teeth. Now I am not the kid I was back then. As soon as he finished speaking, his lower limbs covered with dragon scales suddenly kicked hard. Bang! A deep pit covered with cracks suddenly appeared on the ground within 100 meters. Amid the flying rocks, Kaido's figure had already exploded from the spot like a cannonball. Oh, come on, Garp. I haven't settled accounts with you for the battle that year. He grinned with red eyes, and the momentum on his body seemed to rise madly without end. Visible black and red lightning burst out from his body and quickly wrapped around the black mace. Under the full force of the explosion, his speed was as fast as thunder, and he crossed a distance of hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. With both hands tightly holding the 8 fasting precepts, dragging a bunch of black and red thunder, he hit Garp hard. Ha 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 ha. Back then, you were just a scared kid. Garp's eyes lit up, and his eyes were eager to fight, and his figure jumped up from the deck. Black lightning rose and wrapped around his huge fist. A punch poured out like the backflow of the sea. Thunder Bagua. Under the sea, falling. Boom. In an instant, the mace and fist fell towards each other in midair. The whole world seemed to have come to a standstill at this moment. Thousands of lightning bolts raged wildly, and the black and red domineering aura was compressed into a destructive energy ball. The boiling storm instantly swept the entire island with the 2 as the center. The exploding wind blew in the face, and I don't know how many buildings, land, trees and pirates were blown away. Jin's pupils shrank, and he suddenly drew out his long sword and stabbed it heavily into the ground, resisting this unprecedented and terrifying storm. Quinn, who pulled his head out of the deep pit, hugged a huge rock tightly, looking at the hellish world in front of him with a horrified look. All the colors have disappeared, and only dense thunders occupy the field of vision. And the two ghost-like figures. The vast storm rushed up to the sky, constantly shattering the thick clouds, and the sky was cracked into countless gullies. The entanglement of the conqueror's hockey. There is no contact at all. Quinn murmured in shock. In this sea, there is actually someone who can confront Kaido head-on. Huh. Before he finished speaking, the stalemate was suddenly broken. Quinn's eyes widened, his mouth opened wide, and he looked like he had seen a ghost. Boom. The surging air wave exploded from the energy ball that was compressed to the extreme, and Kaido's figure sank into the ground at a faster speed than he rushed out, smashing a wave of dust and air rolled out like a dragon. A large area of island land was torn apart, and the sea water poured back, and the sand rippled out a huge wave. Ha 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 ha. The power is great, but your spirit is still too weak. Garp's figure landed steadily on the warship, picking his nose and laughing. Damn. Kaido's figure staggered and stood up again from the shocking huge pit, and a glaring blood mark oozed from the corner of his mouth. He was injured. However, before he could catch his breath, two powerful figures suddenly broke through the smoke and dust, and appeared in front of him at lightning speed. Kaido, hand over Darren. Hand over my adjutant. Kaido's pupils shrank instantly, and his face changed drastically. In the reflection of his pupils, two flying white cloaks were extremely magnificent. Black arm, crushing impact. Big Buddha, impact. Zephy's fist was covered with a cold and hard black armor, and Sengoku instantly transformed into a majestic and huge war Buddha. Both of them attacked at the same time. You Navy actually ganged up on me. Bang. Bang. Two dull sounds of hitting flesh sounded at the same time. The golden fist pressed heavily on Kaido's belly, causing him to bend like a cooked shrimp. The powerful black arm hit his face hard, and the exaggerated force even caused ripples on Kaido's face. Bang. The second burst of the two people's armed color domineering exploded circles of white air waves behind Kaido. Hiss. Quinn gasped and his eyes twitched wildly. The next moment, Kaido spat out blood from his mouth, and his figure flew backwards like a kite with a broken string, crashing into the island land, raising huge dust waves hundreds of meters high. Did you succeed? Zongguo and Zephyr landed at the same time, their eyes quickly locked on the direction of the smoke and dust. They seemed to sense something, and their faces changed. A strong wind suddenly rose, and a huge black shadow suddenly penetrated the smoke and dust and roared up. Giant dragon. Kaido, who turned into a dragon, had a mouth full of blood, and said fiercely with violent eyes. Navy, sooner or later, I will avenge today. As the voice fell, the giant dragon raised a storm and soared into the sky. Quinn and dozens of elite members of the Beast Pirates hugged his body tightly. He wants to escape. Zephyr's eyes condensed. Borsellino. Zongguo gritted his teeth and roared. A slow voice came from the warship. I know. You want to change an adjutant, but you still order me without hesitation. You are so cruel. Zongguo's face turned black. The brilliant golden light suddenly rose to the sky and gathered into a tall figure. The navy cloak fluttered, Borsellino stared at the seriously injured and fleeing Kaido with a teasing smile, and opened his arms. Yashikani no Magatama. In an instant, countless golden light bullets, wrapped in an extremely hot breath of destruction, cut through the dark sky and covered the soaring dragon like a storm. Don't even think about it. A low cold shout exploded. A black figure cut through the sky at a very fast speed, and the slender black wings ignited red flames. The blazing flames wrapped around the huge samurai sword and slashed out. Fire Dragon King. Roar. The magnificent fire dragon roared out, opened its red bloody mouth, and suddenly hit the light bullets in the sky. Boom. A violent explosion bloomed in the sky, and the flying flames licked the black clouds like huge wings. Borsellino's figure fell to the ground, and the figure of Jin quickly disappeared was reflected in his sunglasses. He smiled and said, "It's a species I haven't seen before." He glanced at Zongguo. "General Zongguo, do you need me to chase him?" Zhang Guo took a deep look at the dragon that disappeared in the clouds, shook his head and said, "Forget it, if you are alone, I'm afraid there will be some accidents." And he turned his head to look at Zephyr, who was walking quickly, and said in a deep voice, "Darren is indeed not on this island." Zephyr looked at Zhang Guo and confirmed that he did not sense Darren's breath in his observation hockey, and nodded. He took a deep breath, and said helplessly and unbelievably, "That kid actually escaped from Kaido. Please thank you for everything." Well, this chapter is not short. Chapter 107, Kaido's Plan. As soon as these words came out, Sengoku's expression became a little complicated. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. A bitter smile appeared on his face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. So what is this? The Navy headquarters sent 3 top admiral-level combat forces to rescue people, but in the end, Darren escaped from Kaido's hands before they arrived. You will make us look stupid, okay? Ha 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 ha. You are worthy of being my adjutant. At this time, Garp walked over with a big laugh, picking his nose, and puffed out his chest with pride. Sengoku and Zephyr turned over together, rolled his eyes. They were too lazy to argue with Garp. However, although we failed to save anyone, we also gained a lot from this operation. Zhang Guo shook his head and looked at the mottled, charred land in front of him, the corpses of pirates everywhere, and the military production line buildings in the distance that had collapsed into ruins and burned with a raging fire. A smile slowly appeared on his face. Completely destroy the headquarters of the beast pirates and destroy 10 huge arms production lines. In this way, Kaido will not be able to catch his breath for at least a long time. Although the previous fight failed to arrest Kaido, Zhang Guo did not have much regrets about it. After all, as the admiral of the Navy headquarters, he knew better than anyone that Kaido was not so easy to deal with. Although the 3 of them teamed up to beat Kaido to vomit blood and serious injuries just now, with Kaido's physique and animal-type recovery ability, it is estimated that he will be alive and kicking in a short while. Zephyr nodded. But then again, where did Darren go? And according to the information provided by Sakazuki, Kaido should have captured him and Douglas Barrett alive, and no trace of the latter was found. Most importantly, how did they escape? Hearing Zephyr's words, the others' eyes flashed with surprise. Continue the search, centering on this island, and search nearby islands. Even if Darren can escape, his condition is probably not much better, and he shouldn't run too far. Zhang Guo slowly exhaled a breath of turbid air, his eyes flashing with wisdom under his black-framed glasses, and said in a deep voice. Also pay attention to Douglas Barrett's traces. Once found, arrest him immediately. The mountains on the deserted island are continuous, like a huge gray-black dragon spine. Towering trees surround the earth, and countless creatures live peacefully in the dense jungle. Suddenly, as if sensing the breath of some terrifying superior creature, countless animals and insects in the jungle froze and fell to the ground in fear, trembling. Boom! A dull thunder sounded from afar in the sea of clouds in the sky, and a dark shadow that covered the sky and the sun gradually emerged. The legendary dragon broke through the clouds, swooped down from the sky, and crashed into the center of the island's jungle, setting off a vast storm, bending countless towering trees. The mountains shook. The smoke and dust dissipated. Damn Navy! Kaido, with blood on the corner of his mouth, hit the ground with a stick, smashing a hole, and cursed breathlessly. His eyes were full of hideous bloodshot, filled with indescribable violence and anger. Unforgivable. You actually interfered with my fight with Garp. It was clearly a battle between Garp and I, but the group of self-proclaimed, righteous, Navy shamelessly joined forces to besiege me. Even if you are a pirate, you have to be kind and righteous. Facing a powerful opponent, Kaido hated it very much that someone interfered with his fight, and wanted to fight the strong enemy openly. How shameless. Kaido spat a mouthful of bloody saliva on the ground, panting. Feeling the fierce murderous aura and anger constantly venting from their boss, the remaining dozens of beast pirates standing by were silent, shrinking their necks, and dared not breathe. It's impossible that the other 2 are standing by and watching the show. A low mutter suddenly sounded, which seemed so harsh in the dead silence. Kaido turned his head, staring at Quinn, who was busy repairing the mechanical parts of the tail with his violent blood-red pupils, and said in a fierce voice. "What did you say?" Quinn shuddered all over and immediately laughed. "That Kaido boss, I said the Navy is too shameless." He stood up with a face full of righteous indignation, and waved his fist fiercely. "How can you be like me, boss?" Bang! The huge mace hit Quinn's fat face, blasting him away, and with a bang, he smashed into the trunk of a giant tree that several people could hug, startling all the birds in the sky. Jin covered his face in pain. Quinn, this idiot. He couldn't help cursing in his heart, then he raised his head, looked at Kaido, and sighed. "Brother Kaido, the coordinates of the island have been exposed. We probably can't go back." He glanced at the remaining dozens of members of the Beast's pirates. Each of them had a desolate and dead gray face, their eyes were dim, and their morale had fallen to the lowest point. Jin's face became extremely gloomy, and his heart sank. It took several years to form a large pirate group of thousands of people, but after this battle, only these people were left. Not to mention that even the headquarters was uprooted by the Navy, and the arms production line that cost a huge amount of resources to build was completely destroyed. This is their Beast's pirates. An unprecedented rout. What should we do next? Hearing Jin's words, Kaido took a deep breath and forced himself to suppress his anger and calm down. The New World is a vast sea area, so vast that even the Navy and the world government cannot grasp the coordinates and information of all the islands. But this sea area is also very small. Countries and islands with rich resources are extremely limited, and most of them are even in the sky, poor areas that Jindu can't afford. These islands are short of resources, have a low population, and have no economic trade. They are not worth developing. Some of the islands and countries with rich resources and prosperous economies are member states of the world government, and the rest are divided up by various large forces. Among them, Whitebeard and Golden Lion occupy a large share, and their forces are strong. In addition, there is Lingling, who expands her power through marriage. There are only so many territories that are worth using. If someone gets more, it naturally means that someone gets less. If you want to seize more territory, there is only one way, war. But the current poor situation of the Beast's pirates is not enough to support the huge consumption of war. And Kaido doesn't think he can get any advantage from the two bastards Golden Lion and Whitebeard. As a member of the Rocks Pirates, he was just an intern back then, and he knew very well how terrifying the strength of those two guys was. So, there is nowhere to go. No. A crazy grin suddenly appeared on the corner of Kaido's bloody mouth. Let's go there. He raised his mace. The spiked and oppressive Hatchisai pointed to a dark shadow covered by the sea fog in the distance. It was an island with a dangerous terrain and hundreds of meters above sea level. Didn't that idiot Orochi say that the samurai had already gone to sea, right? Kaido said with a grin. Jin nodded. Yes, brother Kaido. He turned around and looked at the enclosed island in the distance. It was indeed a very good place. The mineral resources there were rich, at least dozens of times that of their previous base camp. It was also the only country in this sea that produced seastone. The terrain was dangerous and easy to defend but difficult to attack. Most importantly, according to the latest intelligence, the most powerful warrior in that country that the Beast's pirates fear the most has left the land where he was born and raised in order to pursue his so-called dream. The name of this country is Wano Country. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 108. We could have been friends. At the same time. A deserted island. A silver phantom penetrated the clouds at an extremely terrifying speed and quickly sank into the earth from the sky. Boom. A dull vibration came from the center of the deserted island. The vast dust instantly spread out from the landing point of the phantom, showing yellow-brown radial ripples on the ground and submerging the surrounding trees. The cool sea breeze whistled and quickly blew away the dust. A huge pit appeared in the crooked woods. The top of the small metal ark was completely submerged in the ground, and the hull was almost twisted into a knot. You damn bastard, don't you know how to control your speed? Barrett rubbed his head and walked out of the smoke and dust, moving his neck, making crackling sounds, and said with an unhappy face. "It's good enough that I didn't leave you on that island to die. Don't ask so much of your savior." Darren walked out of the deep pit panting, carrying Senior's arm on his shoulder. As he spoke, he carefully put down Senior, who was covered in blood, to avoid touching his wounds, and let his back lean against the trunk of a big tree. "Where am I?" Senior slowly woke up from his coma at this time, and opened his eyelids with difficulty, and his cracked lips opened and closed to make sounds. "We escaped." Darren sat down next to Senior, took out a pack of wrinkled cigarettes without any manners, and smiled at him. "I've seen your injuries. Don't worry, you won't die." He took out a cigarette from the cigarette box and handed it to Senior. "I told you, when you survive, we'll sit together and have a good smoke." Senior was stunned. He looked at Darren's bloody face, was silent for a while, and took the cigarette from Darren. "Hey, where did you get the cigarette? Give me one too." Barrett, who was sitting not far away, suddenly shouted. Darren took out a lighter, lit it for Senior and himself, and then threw it to Barrett. "I found it from the body of one of the pirates when I broke out of the prison," he said casually. Barrett bit the cigarette in his mouth and sneered. "Your style of doing things is really becoming more and more like a pirate." "Huh." The three of them sat there smoking, looking up through the mottled leaves and shadows, looking at the blue sky and white clouds above their heads. No one spoke for a while. The warm sunshine fell, and the sea breeze blew refreshingly on their cheeks, as if it could dispel all the fatigue and pain. They couldn't help but squint their eyes and enjoy the short leisure time after the war. "Hey Darren, do you think Kaido will be so angry this time?" Barrett exhaled a long stream of smoke from his mouth and glanced at Darren with a smile. "The base camp was directly exposed by us. To the sky, all the arms production lines have been destroyed." Darren shrugged, blew out a smoke ring, and laughed. "Who knows? But then again, I didn't expect that I could cooperate with you like this." That move, splitting the country, was a combined attack technique that they had figured out during their short training in prison. The inspiration for this move came from Barrett's murderous intention to destroy a country, and Darren's understanding of the giant tribe's combined attack technique, hegemony. By bursting out a sufficient amount of armed color domineering in an instant, and driving it with non-human physique and strength at the same time. With the combined efforts of the two, they actually blocked Kaido's full-strength attack entangled with the domineering color domineering. Although Kaido's combat power was far less than that of the giant at this time, it has reached the peak level of later generations, but this record is still worthy of Darren and Barrett's pride. After all, their cooperation time is very short, and the running-in is extremely limited. This move, splitting the country, is still in an imperfect state. In Darren's calculation, the real, splitting the country, is definitely not inferior to the sea domination move performed by Kaido and Big Katakana Mom. In an ideal state, the true power of this move, just as its name suggests, has the terrifying power to tear a country apart with one blow. Ha 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 ha. Who would have thought that two enemies of life and death would actually cooperate to develop a powerful fighting skill? Barrett couldn't help laughing, his long blonde hair flying in the air. His still young face was stained with dried blood, but he looked very domineering. He flicked the ash with a familiar movement. "This world is really ridiculous." Darren smiled, took a deep puff of his cigarette, and looked up at the sky. "Yeah, it's really ridiculous." Senior looked at the two guys in front of him quietly, and found that both of them gradually lowered their heads and stared at the cigarettes in their hands. Birds flew through the forest, and the sunset glow filled the distant sky and sea. When the last ash fell to the ground, Senior's pupils suddenly shrank. Bang! A strong wind blew in his face, blowing his hair flying. He only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and his hands subconsciously grabbed the giant tree behind him. Darren and Barrett collided with each other, fists collided, and elbows suddenly leaned. Under the collision of armed color domineering, the storm directly pressed the trees within a radius of dozens of meters to the east and west. In an instant, the almost violent domineering color domineering burst out from their bodies at the same time. Explosion. Dense lightning flashed in the void, and the world lost its color, leaving only gray. Senior looked at the scene in disbelief. Just now, they were still talking and laughing. How come these two guys started fighting in the blink of an eye? However, the fight between the two came and went quickly. Only a dull roar was heard. Darren and Barrett were both shocked back, and their feet plowed long grooves on the ground. Dust flew. Two burnt cigarette butts slowly fell to the ground from midair at this time. Darren and Barrett looked at each other expressionlessly, and then smiled at the same time. If you were not a Navy, we should be able to be good friends, Darren. Barrett smiled. Darren smiled and shook his head, lighting another cigarette. I thought you were the kind of person who didn't need friends. Barrett was startled, then burst into laughter. Yeah, I really don't need it. He turned around, walked straight to the abandoned metal ark, stretched out his hand and pressed on the twisted metal hull. With the activation of the power of the fusion fruit, the metal ark quickly squirmed like a living thing, forming a small submarine. Darren did not stop his action, and watched calmly as Barrett dragged the small submarine to the sea not far away and pushed it into the sea. Barrett jumped up from the shore and stood on the top of the submarine. The setting sun in the distance reflected his figure red, and the sea surface was sparkling. So Darren. Barrett turned his head and grinned. Don't become too weak, otherwise the next time we meet, it will be too easy to kill you, and that will be meaningless. Darren waved his hand and smiled. Go away, before I regret it. Ha 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 ha. Barrett laughed again, clenched his fists, and then dived into the submarine, quickly disappearing under the sea. Darren stood there, quietly watching the rippling sea, his eyes narrowed. The next time we meet, it may be the final fight, Barrett. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 109 Expensive Suit. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the tall figure of the Commodore, casting a long shadow on the ground. The sea was calm, and seabirds swooped over the waves, making cries. Senior looked at Darren standing there smoking, the smoke lingering around his angular profile, and after a moment of silence, he suddenly asked. Lord Darren, since we can't be friends, why don't you just kill him? Either a friend or an enemy. And the enemy must be eradicated completely. This is the philosophy of life that Senior learned from the Don Quixote family. Darren smiled when he heard this. Although that guy broke an arm, I can't kill him. Barrett's combat power is already close to the level of the Admiral of the Navy. Although after the imprisonment, in the past period of time, the speed of improving various data of his physical strength is definitely much faster than Barrett, but Barrett's armed color domineering is stronger than his own. In terms of overall strength, if a fight breaks out on land, Darren estimates that he will not be able to gain any advantage. Thinking of this, Darren's eyes are a little emotional, and his tone is full of meaning. And Senior, do you know? For people like me, sometimes enemies are more important than friends. Senior nodded as if he understood, and asked again. So what should we do next? That life card has been destroyed in the previous battle, and the reinforcements from the Navy may not be able to find it here. Darren shrugged indifferently. There is no rush for this, after all, they still need some time to clean up the mess. If Admiral Sengoku and his men found Kaido's base camp according to the instructions of the life card, they would definitely fight Kaido. However, if the combat force sent by the Navy is really as Senior said. Darren's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but pray for Kaido silently in his heart. Let's find a town to recuperate first. My injury is minor. Although you are not in danger for the time being, you still need treatment. After hearing Darren's words, Senior nodded in agreement. His physical condition was indeed very bad, with large areas of burns on the surface of his body. If not treated in time, he might suffer from organ failure due to infection and bleeding. The big boss of the Beast's pirates, Plague, Quinn, was indeed terrifyingly strong. With his little combat power, he was as weak as an ant in front of these big pirates in the New World, and could be easily stepped on to death. Wait. It's a small matter. Isn't Lord Darren's injury much more serious than mine? He was also imprisoned and tortured for so many days. Senior looked at Darren subconsciously, trying to identify Darren's injuries. His eyes widened and his mouth opened. Scabbed. 1 day later. A neutral island in the New World. A prosperous trading town. The patient's wounds have been treated with medicine. The situation is not dangerous. Be careful not to get wet within a week and change the medicine in time. Excuse me, doctor. Darren smiled at the doctor and stuffed a large stack of colorful banknotes. No, no. The doctor said while evading, but let Darren stuff the banknotes into his medicine box. After the doctor left, Darren smiled and said to Senior, who was sitting next to him. How do you feel? Senior was naked from the waist up, wrapped in a bloody bandage, and a suit jacket was draped over his shoulders. I feel much better. He smiled a little weakly. Darren threw a cigarette over, lit one for himself, and smiled. Senior, my previous proposal was serious, why don't you consider it again? With your talent and strength, it's a bit of a waste to stay in the Don Quixote family. Although Dover has great potential, he is not mature enough in many cases and often acts on impulse. To be honest, you should also understand his character. As his godfather, I have been worried about him a lot. I need excellent talents like you here. As long as you open your mouth, I can provide you with power, status, wealth, and the most abundant training resources in this sea. As long as you agree, I can even recommend you to join the next officer training camp to the headquarters. No need to doubt, I definitely have such ability. Darren looked at Senior with burning eyes. The calmness, reaction, tenacity, action and toughness shown by Senior in previous actions are indeed very much to his liking. Add to that the special ability of his, water fruit. If he is properly trained, he can definitely become a powerful helper for his subordinates. The most important thing is that Senior is only 16 years old now. What does it mean to have such qualities and talents at the age of 16? At least one thing Darren can be sure of is that Senior has been staying in the Don Quixote family in the original plot, which is indeed a waste of too much time and talent. In the final analysis, this is inseparable from that brat Dov. Doflamingo is too bad at cultivating talents. Lord Darren. Senior smiled bitterly. I have to admit that your proposal is indeed very attractive. His expression was obviously a little moved, but after hesitating for a moment, he still clenched his fists, and his eyes once again returned to their usual indifference and firmness. But I'm sorry, I have to refuse. Oh. Darren raised his eyebrows, but he was not angry. Can you tell me the reason? Senior said in a deep voice. When I was naked and about to starve to death, it was Doflamingo who saved me. A gentle smile gradually appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were filled with memories. I still remember that day. He said he was given an expensive suit that I could never afford in my life, and he said this to me. Senior, your temperament is very suitable for wearing a suit. That's what he said. He raised his hand and gently stroked the material of the suit jacket on his shoulder, with a complicated look in his eyes. The young master gave me food, housing, identity, status, honor, and the secret treasure on the sea. That precious devil fruit. I have no reason to leave the Don Quixote family. So, I'm really sorry, Lord Darren. Darren scratched his head helplessly and sighed. I see, okay, I won't force you. He smiled self-deprecatingly. But now I understand Kaido's mood at that time. It's really uncomfortable to be rejected. Then you have a good rest, Senior. After saying this, Darren turned and left the room. But when he was about to push the door open, he paused, as if he remembered something, turned back again, and said mysteriously. But Senior, do you know? Some clothes may not be as expensive as suits, but they are more meaningful. And these clothes with specific meanings are incomparable to any high-end suits. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 110T0 Level Master Teacher. In the luxurious hotel box, Darren sat quietly by the bed, unfolding his perception, talent and checking his physical condition. Physique, 78.312. Strength, 70.001. Speed, 70.391. Fruit, 77.998. Armament Hockey, 32.012. Overlord Hockey, 51.001. From the escape battle, from the headquarters of the Beast Pirates, all his data have been improved in a not-so-obvious way. Compared to the time when he was imprisoned before, the speed of strength increase is not slow. But Darren was not too discouraged and accepted it calmly. Like what he got by injecting the virus, before the leap-forward growth of physical fitness is a rare opportunity. In fact, with the improvement of physical data and the enhancement of virus resistance, the effect of this way of becoming stronger will continue to decline and finally stagnate. After all, the body is constantly adapting to such pressure. If you want to make further breakthroughs in various data of the body, you must find greater external stimulation and pressure, more arduous practice, and fight with stronger opponents. On the contrary, the attack against Kaido with Barrett seemed to be because of the pressure brought by the entanglement of the domineering color domineering, which improved his spirit. The data of the domineering color domineering rose by 1 point. What is AT0 level master teacher? Darren suddenly remembered the strange jokes of the fans before the crossing, and couldn't help but feel a little funny. Although it sounds absurd, I have to admit that this time of being captured has indeed brought me a lot of strength improvement. Knock knock knock. Just when Darren's thoughts were flying, there was a knock on the door of the luxury suite. Lord Darren, it's me. Senior's voice sounded. Come in. Darren responded. Senior bit a lit cigarette and pushed the door open. He changed into a brand new peaked lapel suit, his movements were decent and elegant, and he was very gentlemanly. He bowed slightly to Darren and said, I have contacted the young master and established a connection with the underground forces of this island. Their fleet will set off in an hour, and the sailing route will pass through the North Sea. Will you go back to the North Sea with me? The young master expressed his longing for you in the Den Den Mushi communication. Darren laughed dumbly. I don't believe that. I'm probably the person that Dover hates to see the most in this sea. Senior pursed his lips and tried to defend his young master. In fact, the young master is very interested in you. Darren waved his hand and smiled. Since I have already left the North Sea, I will not go back in a short time. Dover is still young and still in his rebellious period. I won't go back and get in the way. Let's not talk about this for now. So are you sure this fleet is reliable? Senior nodded. Yes, the owner of this fleet has cooperated with our Don Quixote family. Darren raised his eyebrows, and then couldn't help but smile with some emotion on his face. It seems that Dover's business and industry are indeed developing very well, and they are beginning to radiate to the New World so quickly. Senior said in a deep voice. This is all thanks to the care of Admiral Flying Squirrel. Darren laughed. Okay, then you go back first and tell Dover that I owe him a favor this time. As his godfather, I am very grateful. As for the last part, Senior, I still say that my door is always open to you, as long as you are willing to change your mind. He looked at Senior with undisguised admiration. Senior bowed deeply again. Thank you for your appreciation, Lord Darren. I will definitely convey your instructions to the young master. After saying that, he turned around and strode out of the room without hesitation. Watching Senior's back disappear behind the door, Darren took out a cigarette, bit it in his mouth and lit it. He seemed to suddenly remember something. He picked up the Den Den Mushi provided by the hotel and dialed a familiar signal. Bulu Bulu. Bulu Bulu. The call of the Den Den Mushi was quickly connected after only 2 seconds. A low and steady voice came from the Den Den Mushi. I am the Flying Squirrel. A relaxed smile appeared on Darren's face, and he smiled. Flying Squirrel, it's me. The other side of the Den Den Mushi. North Sea, Lubeck Island. The Flying Squirrel stood on the deck of a huge warship, watching the movement of the Don Quixote family's base in the distance. At this time, 8 days had passed since he received the news that Darren was captured alive by Kaido. But after such a long time, the New World still had not been able to send any information, which made him more and more anxious. He glanced at the 3 warships docked at the port and the 2 warships cruising on the offshore waters, and couldn't help but clenched his fists. The longer the rescue takes, the greater the danger Darren faces. If there is no more news, he must be ready to take action as soon as possible. But at this time, the private Den Den Mushi in his arms suddenly made a series of calls. While commanding several subordinates to adjust the fleet's cruising direction, the flying squirrel took out the Den Den Mushi. I am the flying squirrel. It's me. When the flying squirrel heard this voice, he was stunned at first, and then a surprised smile appeared on his face. Darren. You escaped. Darren's smiling voice came from the Den Den Mushi. Yes, although I experienced a lot of twists and turns on the way, I have escaped here. The flying squirrel immediately breathed a sigh of relief. If there is nothing else, just retreat with the fleet. It is always impolite to surround someone's base. Darren said with a smile. The flying squirrel was stunned, and smiled bitterly with some helplessness. You can't hide anything from you. Darren smiled and said. You did a good job. If something happened to me, the North Sea alone might not be able to trap Doflamingo for too long. But then again, we can escape this time thanks to the helpers sent by Dov. That's a young man named Senior, very good. The flying squirrel pondered for a moment, and suddenly smiled. Didn't you try to win him over? It's not your style. Dolan shook his head. I have been drawn, but he didn't agree. Okay. In the name of the Sea Fleet, give a gift in the past. Chapter 111 I come to challenge. The strongest. New world, a certain island. Oro Jackson is docked at the seaside, and the skull flag of the wave beard is constantly fluttering in the cool sea breeze. A bonfire rises on the coastline. The members of Roger's pirate group sit around the bonfire, smoking and drinking happily. Pieces of red and white barbecue are placed on the bonfire, and the sizzling sound comes out under the burning charcoal fire. The fat water is constantly dripping, making the air full of rich fragrance, which makes people salivate. I really didn't expect that Garp actually gave up chasing us. This is really strange. Rayleigh, with blonde hair and glasses, picked up the wine pot, took a sip lightly, and frowned in some confusion. Ha 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 ha. It must be that Garp knew that he couldn't beat me, so he simply gave up. Roger next to him laughed and couldn't wait to take out a dagger to cut off a piece of barbecue. He poured the sauce on the barbecue with a familiar movement and took a big bite. The aroma of the barbecue bloomed between the taste buds, the gravy overflowed, and the strong sense of fullness and satisfaction rose immediately, making him squint his eyes. Listening to Roger's rough words, Rayleigh rolled his eyes unhappily. I guess something more important happened. Jabba, who was smoking a cigar, said in a deep voice. Two huge black battle axes were crossed and placed beside him, emitting a faint cold light in the sun. Important things. Rayleigh raised his head and took a sip of wine, muttering. This has never happened before. Since the war that year, Garp has been keeping an eye on us, even the transfer order from the world government was ignored by him. Roger put his arm around Rayleigh's shoulders and laughed. Why think so much, isn't this a good thing for us? If it weren't for Garp that bastard running away, can we have this opportunity to sit down and eat meat and drink wine? Rayleigh heard this helplessly. That's right. That's enough. Living in the present is the most important thing. Roger waved his hand to interrupt him, and raised the wine pot with a big laugh. Let's drink to our heart's content today. Roar. The crew burst into cheers of jubilation. Rayleigh pinched his temples with a headache. Drinking is drinking, eating meat is eating meat. But Roger, you bastard, can you please not rub the oil on your hands on me? He looked at the oily handprints on the shoulders of his clothes, and his mouth twitched. Suddenly, as if they had noticed something, Rayleigh, Roger and Jabba's eyes flashed at the same time, and a ray of red light flashed through the depths of their pupils. Boom! A water column tens of meters high suddenly exploded on the sea surface. The sea water all over the sky fell down, and a small submarine jumped high from the bottom of the sea, like a sharp ship breaking the ice, rushing to the coast with great momentum. Who is it? The faces of the people in Roger's pirate group changed, and they picked up their weapons and stared at the submarine that dragged a long groove on the beach with vigilance. Click. A dull sound came out, and the hatch of the submarine suddenly opened. A sturdy figure with long messy golden hair walked out of the hatch. You, or Roger? The man glanced around, and his eyes quickly locked on Roger, who was wearing a blood-red captain's coat, and a sly grin appeared at the corner of his mouth. Roger squinted and observed the man for 2 seconds, and suddenly a smile of eagerness appeared on his face. "Yes, who are you?" Boom. A majestic momentum burst out from the body of the blond boy, turning into a mighty tide that swept out, causing everyone's breathing to stagnate suddenly. Douglas Barrett. Under the violent domineering aura, Barrett's golden hair fluttered wildly, his eyes quickly turned red, and he exuded a crazy fighting spirit like sheer purgatory. "I come to challenge the strongest." As soon as the words fell, Barrett's figure shot out from the spot like a beast out of a cage, and rushed towards Roger. 10 seconds later. Bang! Barrett, who flew backwards, hit the submarine hard, denting the steel cabin. He shed blood from the corner of his mouth, and looked at Roger, who was still sitting there with a bite of barbecue in his mouth, with disbelief, and a trace of despair seeped out of his eyes. "How is it possible, the gap?" Roger tore off a piece of barbecue and smiled. "You are quite strong, but you are still a few hundred years too early to challenge me." "Damn." Barrett's eyes were suddenly filled with ferocious bloodshot. But a wine jug was suddenly thrown over and landed in his arms. "You haven't eaten yet, kid." Barrett was stunned. What came into his eyes was Roger's domineering face with a mellow smile, and the kind smiles of other members of Roger's pirate group. "Even if you want to continue fighting, you have to eat before fighting." Roger smiled and said, "Isn't it? The island is prosperous in business, and the streets are crowded with people. There are many shops and a wide variety of goods." Darren smoked a cigar and walked happily on the street, enjoying this rare leisure time. The military uniform had been destroyed in imprisonment and fighting. At this time, he bought a new set of clothes. The upper body is a loose white shirt, the lower body is wearing casual black trousers, and the black tie is tied loosely, but it does not look dirty at all, but has a different wild charm. This clean and neat outfit, coupled with Darren's unrestrained temperament and outstanding appearance, attracted the attention of many young girls and ladies along the way. Darren walked into a pub, and as the partition door was pushed open, the noise and sunshine outside disappeared. The lights in the pub were slightly dim, the atmosphere was full of charm and quiet, and soft tunes flowed in the air. "A glass of whiskey, with ice." Darren walked to the bar and shouted to the bartender. "Also, do you have a map?" Having a drink is important, but Darren didn't forget the main business. Places like taverns, entertainment venues and casinos are often places where information circulates. He had never been to the New World, so he naturally had to confirm the location of this island first. After this series of events, Darren thought that even in the dangerous waters of the New World, known as the pirate graveyard, he had the ability to protect himself. As long as he didn't run into those legendary guys, there were only a handful of people in the New World who could leave him behind. Taking the whiskey and map handed over by the bartender, Darren threw a few bills over. He took a sip of the wine glass and felt the mellow and spicy liquor spreading in his throat. He couldn't help squinting his eyes. Turning over the extremely simple map in his hand, Darren roughly identified the location of this neutral island. It turned out to be in one of the nearby waters of Wano. "I'm grateful for everything." Chapter 112 Kazuki Clan. Wano Country. Staring at the mysterious country that is particularly obvious on the map, countless thoughts flashed through Darren's mind in an instant. The timeline he traveled through is relatively vague. Even as a person who knows most of the original plot, he can't figure out the current situation in Wano Country. But one thing that can be confirmed is that since Kaido captured him to that strange island instead of Wano Country, it is enough to prove that his influence has not yet radiated to Wano Country. So, I wonder if the so-called invincible Kazuki Oden has gone out to sea. A figure of a samurai appeared in Darren's mind, and his mouth Zhao couldn't help but sneer. He didn't have a good impression of the Kazuki family in the original plot. Oden's father, Kazuki Sukiyaki, was cowardly and stupid, and was usurped by Kurozumi Orochi. After escaping from prison, he didn't dare to commit suicide or resist, and watched Wano Country fall into the hands of Orochi and Kaido, causing countless people to suffer. To put it nicely, he endured for 20 years, and to put it bluntly, he was cowardly and afraid of death. If there is really a samurai's blind loyalty and integrity, even if he is a mantis trying to stop a chariot, he will bleed on the streets, and at the very least he will commit seppuku proudly, at least he will not disgrace the name of the general. What about Kazuki Oden? When he was young he was lawless, engaged in arson and gambling, and he went after women in his own country to build a harem, causing public outrage. After he became an adult, he abandoned his country and family, and for the so-called freedom and dream, he let go of the country that raised him and gave birth to him. A muscle waste that was so naive that it was almost mentally retarded, who had a huge fighting force and an all-star lineup of foreign aides such as the Whitebeard Pirates and the Roger Pirates, was easily controlled and danced naked under the city wall, which was embarrassing. Without preparation and without backup, he took the 9 heroes and gambled everything, but in the end, he lost everything. As for Kazuki Momonosuke, he was a pure waste. When the wind was against him, he wanted to surrender and kneel down, and when the wind was with him, he is proud of his achievements, lustful and incompetent. Throughout the entire story of Wano country, he has made no contribution. He became the general of Wano country just by relying on his father's influence and a light flame cloud. He even falsified history and portrayed himself as the savior hero of Wano country. The Kazuki family has 3 generations, which really makes people feel bad. The citizens of Wano country are really unlucky to have these 3 monarchs. Darren shook his head. But just as he was thinking, the conversation of a table in the corner of the tavern caught his attention. It's really enviable. I didn't expect that such a good thing would be taken by the Hall brothers first. That kind of grade can definitely be sold at a sky-high price. A table in the corner of the tavern. Several middle-aged men dressed as pirates were drinking with their heads shaking. They wore colorful gem rings on their hands and had expensive cigars in their mouths. They had the temperament of nouveau riche. But then again, that woman was stupid enough to believe the words of the Hall brothers so easily. Ha ha ha, send her to Wano country. So naive. Even the Navy's warships dare not enter Wano country on this sea. So what is the situation in that country? There is no news from the outside world. Who knows? Anyway, you can't afford to offend. I heard that the Dark Emperor's ship went there to investigate. 100 people on the entire ship were wiped out silently, and the Dark Emperor didn't even dare to fart. Hiss. But that woman, she's clearly dressed in the style of Wano country. Anyway, Brother Hall won't send her to Wano country. They'll probably capture her on a deserted island nearby, lock her up, and sell her to traffickers for a good price. That's right. This is the first time I've seen such a beautiful woman, especially that natural long light green hair. Tisk 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 tisk. Yes, yes, and that delicate face. Hey. The men couldn't help but imagine, and obscene smiles appeared on their faces. A bottle of high-proof whiskey was suddenly placed on the table with a bang. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask where this woman you just mentioned was taken? The guys were stunned, and subconsciously looked up along the arm holding the bottle. A rebellious and handsome young face came into view. The black-haired young man in a white shirt was showing them a hearty smile. I'll buy you a drink and make friends. The men were silent for a moment. Ha. Make friends. They suddenly laughed, as if they heard some ridiculous joke, and they were shaking with laughter. Drink. Who do you think you are? One of the bald men suddenly laughed grimly, stood up suddenly, picked up the dagger at his waist and slashed it fiercely at Darren's neck. I am Kong. The sharp dagger hit the young man's skin, but it seemed to be stabbed on steel, and a burst of sparks flew out. With a click, the dagger broke. The bald man's voice stopped abruptly, and the grim smile suddenly froze on his face. Hiss. At this time, the other people who were watching the excitement in the tavern gasped. Some of them couldn't help rubbing their eyes with their hands, and couldn't believe what they saw. This scene. The dagger pierced into the human skin, actually broke. This. What are you? The bald man and his accomplices turned pale and stared at Darren in disbelief. Ah. Darren sighed and said helplessly. If you don't want to be my friend, then you can only be my enemy. The moment the voice fell, the bald man and several others felt a flash in front of their eyes, and their bodies flew out with a bang. Crackling. The sound of broken chest ribs continued to sound. Except for the bald man himself, the other accomplices had vomited blood and fell to the ground, as if they had no life. The tavern was suddenly silent. Everyone stood there in fear, not daring to move. "No, don't kill me. I'll tell you everything. Don't kill me." The bald man knelt on the ground with a bang, shaking all over. Darren sat on the table with a graceful movement, unscrewed the bottle of whiskey slowly, and said to the pale bald man with a smile, "Do you want to drink this bottle of wine now?" The bald man was stunned, and nodded frantically, kneeling forward, took the bottle from Darren's hand, and drank it hard. Soon his face turned from pale to red, amber wine oozed from his nostrils, and tears overflowed from his eyes. But he still poured the wine into his mouth desperately, not daring to stop. Begging for everything, grateful. Chapter 113 Stealing Love. On an unknown deserted island. Tall trees and rocks surrounded the seaside, and the sun was shining. A beautiful figure was running away desperately on the coast, gasping for breath, and her slender legs in short boots made anxious footsteps. Her waist-length light green hair swayed gently as she ran, and she was wearing a pink kimono. "Ha ha ha ha. Don't run. You are such a beauty, top-notch stuff. Where can you run to? Ha 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 ha. Why are you running away, beauty?" The pirates' eyes turned into a pair of hearts, and they chased after the woman with greedy grins on their faces. "We sent you to Wano country as agreed." They looked at the beautiful figure that stopped at the edge of the sea and had no way to escape, and laughed. "Come here, we don't want to hurt you." The young woman looked at the endless sea in front of her, bit her peach-like red lips with her pearly teeth, a flash of despair flashed in her eyes, and she slowly turned around. "I think so." She looked at the ship in the distance and said angrily, "Your ship is a ship for buying and selling people. If you hurt me, you won't be able to sell it at a good price." Hearing this, the smiles on the faces of the pirates gradually became gloomy. The woman gritted her teeth and said in a deep voice, "I was actually deceived by you guys who look like bad guys. I'm so stupid." She suddenly drew out the samurai sword from her waist, and her slender white hands held the hilt of the samurai sword at the same time, with the tip of the sword pointing at the group of pirates. As she moved, the hem of her kimono fluttered, and with her firm eyes, there was a kind of shocking and cool beauty. The leading blonde pirate sneered. "Resistance is useless, there is the sea behind you, there is no place to escape, give up." He drew out his weapon, led his subordinates to press towards the woman step by step, and laughed sinisterly. "Give up, we will love you well." The shadow gradually stained the woman's face, and she suddenly sighed deeply. "That's it, I have to continue traveling to the future." A melancholy, sad and helpless murmur slowly sounded, and a strange and incomparable demonic light gradually rose from her body. This is. What happened? She seems to be activating some ability." The pupils of the pirates shrank and their faces changed drastically. In their sight, it seemed that there was some untouchable mysterious power, swirling and rising around the beauty in front of them, making her light green hair flutter without wind. "Stop her quickly. Don't let her run away. Go." The blond man suddenly showed a fierce look on his face, and he gave an order with a determined heart. As soon as the voice fell, all the pirates drew their weapons and rushed towards the beauty in front of them. But at this moment, buzz buzz buzz. A sharp and violent explosion suddenly came from the sky, and the biting wind made all the pirates and women stop their movements at the same time. It was the sound of some sharp weapon cutting through the air. The next moment, swish, swish, swish. The sky full of metal spikes fell through the air and sank into the ground at a speed that could not be captured by the naked eye. The pirates could not even scream, and their bodies were pierced, like a hornet's nest, and nailed into the ground by metal spikes. The pungent smell of blood filled the air immediately. The woman looked at the pirates in front of her with a look of astonishment, her eyes losing focus, and she couldn't help but cover her mouth and subconsciously took 2 steps back. But when she retreated, she felt that she had hit a thick and solid in Darren's chest. "Ah, sorry." The woman turned around involuntarily and bowed to apologize subconsciously. But when she raised her head, a handsome face with wild and unruly temperament suddenly came into view. The tall black-haired young man stood in the sun, wearing a clean and tidy white shirt, with the sparkling clear blue sea behind him, showing her a charming smile. "I'm sorry, didn't I scare you? What a handsome man." Tian Yushi's heart beat fast and her face flushed slightly. Did she lean on his chest just now? Oh no. Tian Yushi lowered his head, not daring to look at Darren's face, and said in a muffled voice. "It turned out that he saved me." Darren smiled and said, "I'm glad you're okay." "No, I won't." Tetsuki Toki took a deep breath, suppressed his pounding heart, bowed deeply, and said elegantly, "Thank you for saving me. I'm grateful for saving my life. My name is Tetsuki Toki. What's your name?" It was indeed her. Tetsuki Toki. One of the most mysterious and special devil fruit users on this sea. The owner of the time fruit, Tetsuki Toki from 800 years ago. Of course, in addition to this gentle woman with a beautiful face has another more familiar identity in the original plot. The wife of Kazuki Oden and the biological mother of Kazuki Momonosuke. The light green hair fluttered slightly in the wind, and the right side of the hair was decorated with red and yellow hair accessories. A pink kimono with several crescent-shaped patterns on it set off her slender figure. The slender legs are extremely white, wearing a pair of yellow short boots. It has to be admitted that Tianyushi is the most beautiful woman Darren has seen since he traveled through time. She is worthy of being the mother of Kazuki Hiyori, the first courtesan of the Kingdom of Flowers. After all, Kazuki Hiyori's stunning beauty could never be inherited from Kazuki Oden. Looking at Tianyushi, who is stunningly beautiful, Darren's eyes flickered, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Darren never denied that he is lustful, and everyone loves beauty. He considers himself not a gentleman, and he is happy to accept the nickname of scum. After finally traveling through the pirate world, who doesn't want Nami, Robin, Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Hancock, Carly, Fave? Not to mention that Kazuki Shi's devil fruit ability has extremely special power, which is definitely worth his efforts. Of course, he will not force or deceive, he still has this bit of character. Thinking of this, Darren showed a friendly and gentle smile on his face. "It's our first meeting, I'm glad to meet you. My name is Rogers Darren, the current Commodore of the Navy headquarters. When I was patrolling the nearby islands, I found a case of human trafficking here, so I came to take a look." "Navy, Army." Tien Yushi whispered softly, and her expression was obviously hesitant. After the experience of being deceived just now, she subconsciously became more vigilant, and her brain started to think quickly. She came from 800 years ago and had been constantly traveling to the future in the long river of time. Although there was no military organization called the Navy 800 years ago, she had more or less heard about the purpose of this organization during her journey through time. With the goal of defending justice, it protects the peace and stability of the world. It should be trustworthy. Besides, how could such a handsome man be a bad guy? He is her lifesaver. Tien Yushi secretly clenched her fists, cursed herself in her heart, and her vigilance gradually dissipated. "Yes, where is your hometown? This is an uninhabited island. It's not easy to leave here." Darren said lightly. "If you believe me, I can take you away from here and send you back to your hometown." Tien Yushi's eyes lit up when he heard it. "Really? I want to go to Wano country. Can you take me to Wano country?" "Wano country? That country is in a closed-door state. It's not so easy to enter." Before Darren finished speaking, the sea surface suddenly rioted and suddenly exploded a magnificent water column. Tien Yushi was shocked. Before she could react, the young navy in front of her had taken a step forward and protected her behind her. "Don't worry, I will protect you." Darren narrowed his eyes. The next second, a tall figure suddenly shot out from the sea, wearing a huge purple and white shimonaro and a kimono embroidered with a crescent moon pattern, splashing water. Danfeng eyes, thick eyebrows, wild black hair, rounded top, a prominent widow's peak and triangular sideburns. But the man was swollen all over, his face swollen like a pig's head, and looked as ugly as a monster. I heard a woman's cry for help. The man's eyes swept across the beach, and after seeing the bloody corpses all over the ground, he quickly glanced at Tianyu-shi, who looked panicked, and then immediately stared at Darren with a fierce look on his face. You are the one who persecuted this beautiful woman. Sure enough. The moment the man rushed out of the sea, Darren recognized his identity, and couldn't help but curl up a mocking sneer at the corner of his mouth. Kazuki, Odin. Please everything, thank you very much. Chapter 114 Must Die. The next king of Wano country, a powerful warrior admired by Roger, Whitebeard and Kaido. Kazuki Odin. I haven't even started yet, and you're trying to snatch your wife back. The sneer on Darren's lips suddenly turned cold, and a barely visible blue arc jumped up between his fingers, and the invisible and mysterious magnetic field and biomagnetic field perception spread out instantly. The muscles of his whole body suddenly tensed up, and he made an attacking state like a tiger pouncing on its prey, and his momentum soared. There are many reasons to intercept Kazuki Odin. First, an incompetent waste like Kazuki Odin is not worthy of a charming woman like Toki. Second, he doesn't like Kazuki Odin. Third, Toki's devil fruit ability is very powerful. Even if she doesn't like him, taking her by his side and subduing her as his subordinate can also be used as a trump card. Of course, no matter how many reasons there are behind this, the most important reason is only one. Momonosuke must die. Sister, don't panic, I'll come and save you from this villain. Kazuki Odin, whose head was swollen like a sea monster, shouted, and suddenly drew out the two swords from his waist, and slashed down at Darren from the sky above his head. One black and one white, two sharp swords cut out black and white phantoms in the void, and their sharpness was so sharp that they cut through the air silently. In an instant, a strong sense of oppression came over him. The sharp breath from the two famous swords made Darren's eyes stern. Take a step forward. Bang! A dull sound came from the beach ground under his feet. Then, a loud bang. Where Darren's kick landed, a large area of sand and land collapsed in front of him, and the sea surface suddenly rioted, raising layers of seawater. Under the monster-level inhuman power, Darren's figure took advantage of the recoil of this kick and flew up like a meteorite. The dark-armed color domineering instantly covered his arms, and the muscles on his arms bulged, and then suddenly compressed. Blasted out like a rocket launcher. Clang! The two fists and the two swords collided heavily, rubbing out a large number of sparks. Boom! The magnificent air waves spread out, sweeping the entire island, causing the sea surface to raise tens of meters high waves. The wind was raging wildly, and thousands of red lightnings bloomed around the bodies of the two people, densely occupying the entire world in front of them. The clouds were constantly shaken and disintegrated, and a huge gully gradually began to form in the sky. The collision of domineering. The sky and the earth changed color. The fierce storm encompassed everything, directly blowing away countless flying sand and rocks. Tian-Yushi's breathing suddenly stagnated, and a strong sense of fainting came over her. Sharp gravel whistled in the wind, and her pretty face turned pale. But at this moment, a piece of metal suddenly rose in front of her, blocking all the flying sand and rocks, and quickly changed its shape to form a safe shelter, firmly protecting her, supporting her body to fly back dozens of meters. It was that handsome young navy. Even in the fierce battle, you didn't forget to protect me. Tian-Yushi's heart suddenly surged with a warm current, and her cheeks flushed. In the wind, her hands tightly grasped the cold and hard metal, but her heart was filled with unprecedented warmth and security. In the lightning storm that kept exploding, Kazuki Odin's eyes widened. His attack was actually blocked. He was stunned at first, and then his face, which was swollen and whitened by the sea water, suddenly showed an extremely excited light. Ha 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 ha, you are quite capable to take my knife. Darren squinted at Kazuki Odin in front of him and sneered. You are really underestimated. From the strength of the knife just now and the strength of the domineering color domineering released by Kazuki Odin, Darren quickly figured out the approximate combat power of this guy. At this time, Kazuki Odin should have just gone to sea and was undergoing the test of Whitebeard, preparing to join the Whitebeard pirates. And his combat power was far from the level of fighting Kaido in Wano country many years later. Add to that the weakening caused by the sea water. A grim smile suddenly appeared on Darren's lips, and the fist that blocked Kazuki Odin's double sword suddenly changed into a claw. The dark hands tightly grasped his double swords. Kazuki Odin was startled and wanted to pull the double swords out of Darren's hands, but was shocked to find that the latter's power was so strong that the double swords did not move at all. "You are the only one who is invincible in the world." Darren grinned and pulled hard with both hands holding the double swords. He pulled Kazuki Odin and his swords in front of him, and then he hit him hard on the forehead. Boom! Kazuki Odin was struck by lightning. Under Darren's headbutt covered with armed color domineering, the whole person crashed into the ground like a cannonball, and smashed out a huge hole. The next second, the Commodore swooped down like lightning, his body spinning several times in the air at high speed, dragging the exaggerated centripetal force, and the black gun that was raised high, the black military boots chopped at the dizzy Kazuki Odin like a battle axe. The target is the head. The surging power and explosive force made the strong wind blur Darren's face, and the momentum bursting out of his body was as deep as Shura. Armed battle axe meteor. The fatal sense of crisis came over him, and the pupils of Kazuki Odin, whose head was bleeding, suddenly shrank, and the cold and hard military boots reflected in his pupils rapidly enlarged at an extremely terrifying speed. Clang! He hastily crossed his two swords to block, and his figure rolled and crawled away. The military boots were wrapped in surging domineering and power, pouring down like the Milky Way, and the strata of the entire small island trembled heavily. Tear. From the landing point of the military boots, the earth tore a huge crack like a black python, and rolled up the dragon-like dust, reaching the sea surface. A huge amount of sea water poured back into the crack, and then a surging wave was raised. The sea water was boiling, and the smoke and dust were howling. Kazuki Odin stood up again, panting, his face was extremely solemn, and his eyes became more fanatical. "I really didn't expect that I could fight such a strong man just after going out to sea. I was right to choose to go out to sea, ha 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 ha. Remember, my name is Kazuki Odin." A crisp sound of a coin flying suddenly interrupted his words. Kazuki Odin's observation haki seemed to sense something. His pupils suddenly contracted, and his face changed drastically. "I'm not interested in your name." A cold voice came out. The wind blew away the smoke. In the vision of Kazuki Odin's pupils, the powerful guy was facing him diagonally, with his right hand raised in front of him, making the starting action of snapping his fingers. The eyes were cold. A coin was flipping and falling from midair. In an instant, an indescribable sense of threat occupied Kazuki Odin's brain. "I ask for everything, and I am grateful." Chapter 115. Have you ever seen such a physical skill? A few minutes ago. The island is far away. The huge Moby Dick, like a white whale, is sailing on the sea, dragging a thick iron chain that is submerged in the sea water at the stern. "Dad, Odin is about to hold on. Why don't you agree to let him join us?" Marco said indignantly to Whitebeard, who was sitting in the main seat. "Yes, Dad, Odin has persisted for 2 full days. It's almost over, right? Besides, don't you like Odin very much, Dad? If we have him join, it will definitely add a powerful combat force to our Whitebeard pirates." The other crew members of the Whitebeard pirates also began to persuade. Looking at his sons talking to each other, Whitebeard couldn't help but flash a hint of helplessness in his eyes. It must be admitted that Kazuki Odin's personality is indeed very much to his taste. But it was precisely because of Odin's powerful strength that reminded him of the chaos of the Rocks pirates back then. It is not a good thing for unruly and powerful forces to appear in the same pirate group at the same time. It is very likely to cause all kinds of friction and conflicts, and no one will submit to anyone. However, just as Whitebeard was pondering, boom! A magnificent roar suddenly broke out in the sky above the island in the distance. Circles of red air waves spread from the island, and even at such a long distance, Whitebeard and his men could still see the surging red lightning. The collision of domineering. That's the direction Odin left just now. He fought with someone else. What a strong aura. Who is it? Marco and the others stared with their eyes wide open, feeling the waves of domineering aura that made people's hearts palpitate from afar, and their hearts were slightly shaken. They all saw Odin's strength. Even in the Whitebeard pirates, he was second only to Daddy. When they first met, he challenged Daddy and fought. Although he was ravaged by Daddy in the end, they also witnessed the powerful swordsmanship of this Wano country samurai. But now, he actually met an opponent on that deserted island. And judging from the collision of the domineering color and the fluctuations, it seems that the two are evenly matched. Dad. Marco looked at Whitebeard anxiously. Whitebeard sighed, and didn't care about the test, and said in a deep voice. Adjust the course. Deserted island. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. The coin that fell in the air was flipped, and it kept flashing with a faint cold light. Zzz. A bunch of blue arcs danced and flashed around the man's fingers. Although the man hadn't done anything yet, Kazuki Odin felt an unprecedented sense of oppression and threat, which made the pores all over his body stand up. The feeling of a sharp knife tip against his pupils, or the fear of being stared at by a ferocious beast, gave him a sense of certainty. This guy has completely locked onto his breath. It is impossible to dodge the next attack. This feeling. Kazuki Odin suddenly grinned. His eyes burst into a crazy and fiery fighting spirit, burning like a raging fire. Ha 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 ha, it's really great. He laughed loudly, took a step forward with his eyes shining, and his figure shot out like a gust of wind. The armament haki was like flying cherry blossoms and red flowing water, quickly wrapping around his body. The solemn and dark, Yanma. The white and loud, Aim no Habizan. 2. Big Fast Swords 21 works, made by the famous swordsmith Shimotsuki Kozaburo of Wano country. Also ignited the armament haki like a blazing flame. He held them with both hands and raised them above his head. Odin 2 Swords Ryu. Kazuki Odin's face was full of excitement, and the Ryu no Habizan surrounded his whole body and spiraled up like a hurricane, and his momentum instantly climbed to the highest point. At this time, the spinning coin finally fell to the lowest point. Mogen Shirataki. Magnetic Overload Katakana Middle. Electromagnetic Cannon. Odin's figure suddenly shot out, his two swords overlapped in front of him, and he slashed at the huge blue beam of light. Boom. The mighty air wave suddenly exploded and spread out, sweeping in all directions. The earth was like an ocean, and countless rocks, soil and trees were uprooted and blown into the sky. The whole island shook violently. The dazzling light instantly occupied all vision. The next second, two figures rushed out of the violent air wave and thick smoke at the same time, colliding like a meteor hitting the earth. Bang! The swirling wind rolled back, and the two took a half step back at the same time. A hint of coldness flashed in the depths of Darren's eyes. Is the armed color domineering much stronger than mine? In that case, I can't go head to head with your two extremely sharp swords. A grim smile appeared on Darren's lips, and he stretched out his hand without retreating to face the Yama that Kazuki Odin cut out. Kazuki Odin was stunned. Swish. The Yama wrapped in Ryuo directly cut into Darren's chest, and a large amount of blood spurted out, staining the white shirt red. Stuck by flesh and blood. How is this possible? This sword is Yama. The Yama that is known as, the one that can destroy even hell. Yanma wrapped in Ryuo. What on earth is this guy's body made of? Kazuki Odin's pupils shrank. But in the moment he was stunned, Darren's body was infinitely close. Your swordsmanship is indeed very strong, but do you know? In a close-range fight. Darren's eyes were filled with a frenzied fighting spirit. He grabbed the blade of the Yama sword stuck on his ribs with one hand. His big hand was like a huge shadow, quickly covering Kazuki Odin's face. Kazuki Odin subconsciously raised the aim no habe slash to block. At this time, Darren had already exceeded the normal attack range of his swordsmanship and sword swinging, causing his movements to be extremely awkward. A violent voice like Shira sounded in his ears. Physical skills are strong. Kazuki Odin's mind was empty. Darren's movements were extremely fast, and he didn't care about his palm being cut open and bleeding by the aim no have slash, which was known as, the sty can be cut down. Bend your knees, arm yourself, raise your legs. A knee strike like a meteorite impact. Bang! Kazuki Odin was struck by lightning, his body suddenly bent, and he vomited seawater mixed with blood. There was even a crisp sound from the ribs of his chest. A circle of white air waves that were clearly visible to the naked eye originated from his back. A trace of blood splashed on Darren's face, making his eyes more unruly and fierce. Another heavy elbow hit Kazuki Odin's throat. Kazuki Odin's face turned pale and blood spurted out of his mouth. But this was just the beginning. Darren didn't give him any chance to breathe. All kinds of close combat techniques were like a storm. Bang 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 bang. Kazuki Odin staggered due to the continuous beatings, and blood mist gradually spread on the surface of his body. But every time he wanted to bite his teeth to escape, Darren clung to him like a maggot on the tarsal bone, making it impossible for him to display his superb and powerful swordsmanship. Bang! With a volley, Kazuki Odin stepped back a few steps, his hair was completely messy, and he looked extremely miserable. Before Kazuki Odin could catch his breath from the severe pain, Darren's figure appeared in front of him again like a ghost. You haven't seen such a physical skill in Wano country, right? Darren sneered, stretched out his bloody big hand, grabbed his head like an iron clamp, and smashed the ground under his feet like shaking a mountain. Boom! The ground within 100 meters was shattered suddenly, and countless cracks were densely derived. Kazuki Odin's pupils were dilated for a moment, and a large amount of blood gushed out of his mouth and nose. The flying rocks fell in the wind, and the blood-covered Navy Commodore's black hair was fluttering. The face was grinning, full of hostility. Ask for everything, grateful. Chapter 116 The Strongest Man, so what? Rocks were flying. Kazuki Odin's body was directly embedded in the ground, creating a shocking huge pit, and his mouth and nose were filled with gushing blood. His pupils were dilated for a moment, his mouth was full of blood, and then he gritted his teeth, his eyes bursting with determination and tenacity. Yan Mo. Holding the black demon sword, Yan Mo, in reverse, he stabbed towards Darren's abdomen. At this moment, the Yama seemed to come alive, like a hungry and greedy demon from hell, madly absorbing Kazuki Odin's domineering aura. As the domineering aura of Kazuki Odin's entire arm was drained by Yama, the flesh and skin on his arm quickly shrank and dried up. The black and red flowing cherry blossoms were swallowing and spitting on the blade of Yama, as if the flames of hell were ignited. Darren's pupils shrank slightly. He felt the coldness of death from the breath of this Yama. This knife is wrong. It actually sucked almost all of Kazuki Odin's domineering aura. With a sudden jump in his heart, Darren had to give up the posture of continuing to attack, and his body twisted subconsciously. At a moment of sideways tilt, the Commodore groaned. The extremely sharp Yama brushed past his waist and abdomen, cutting open his shirt and flesh, leaving a horrifying wound on it, and a large amount of blood spilled. It can be imagined that if Darren did not dodge, his abdomen would definitely be pierced by this Yama that absorbed a huge amount of domineering energy. Although his physique has been cultivated to the level of an inhuman monster, it is far inferior to Kaido's, indestructible, body covered with hard dragon scales. Seeing that his all-out sword could not kill this guy, Kazuki Odin's face suddenly became extremely ugly. It's a good sword. Darren sneered as if he could not feel the wound on his side. He suddenly raised his eyebrows. In the corner of his eyes, a blue figure swooped down on the sea at an astonishing speed. Strange blue flames roared. Is it Marco? The Whitebeard pirates are nearby. Let go of Odin. Marco, who transformed into the form of a phoenix, roared with his eyes about to burst. Giant blue fireballs sprayed out from the wings of the phoenix and shot towards Darren. Darren glanced at him coldly, and also saw the Moby Dick, which was like a white whale on the sea not far away, and looked at the domineering man with a white scimitar beard on the bow. The majestic blonde man held a huge sword in one hand, and the white captain's coat fluttered behind him, staring at Darren with threatening eyes. The anger and threat emanating from his body made the surrounding sea and air begin to vibrate violently. Navy brat. Let him go. The strongest man in the world. Edward Newgate with white beard. So this is a threat. Darren sneered with narrowed eyes, but his eyes burst out with unruly and crazy heat, and he took a step forward suddenly. At the moment when he passed by Yanma's blade, he put his hand on Kazuki Oden's shrunken arm with atrophied flesh and blood. Kazuki Oden's pupils suddenly contracted, and his mind was horrified. Feeling the terrifying power coming from Darren's hand, he roared with red eyes and tried his best to struggle to distance himself. At the same time, he swung the Tianyu Yuzan and slashed at Darren. Very good reaction, but your domineering spirit has been drained by Yanmo. Darren grinned with a vicious smile, ignoring the Tianyu Yuzan that was slashing down in front of him, and suddenly exerted force with his arm. The moment when Tianyu Yuzan penetrated into his shoulder and splashed a large amount of blood. Darren's face was full of viciousness, facing the horrified eyes of Kazuki Oden, facing the furious eyes of Marco and Whitebeard. He grinned provocatively. So what if he is the strongest man? Tear it off. Tear off Kazuki Oden's entire arm, including the hand and the knife. No. Marco roared with his eyes wide open. Swish. Large amounts of blood gushed out from Kazuki Oden's broken arm and wounds. He covered the blood hole on his broken arm tightly with one hand, wailing in pain like a wild beast. As Yanmo drained his domineering spirit, his flesh and blood body could not stop Darren's monster-like violence. At this time, the blue-green phoenix flame also fell suddenly. Boom! A strong shock wave suddenly emerged on the ground, and large areas of blue-green flames spread out. The next moment, Darren shot out from the flames, and his military boots plowed two long grooves on the ground. He casually threw the broken arm in his hand on the ground, and blue arcs emerged from his fingertips. The Yanmo, with purple-black flame patterns on the blade flew up from the broken arm, hovered beside Darren, and kept trembling. The so-called, famous sword that can destroy even hell. Yanmo is in hand. However, remembering the information that this sword can suck the user's domineering aura crazily, Darren did not reach out to grab it, but used the power of the magnet fruit to control the restless Yanmo. You damn guy. The smoke and blue flames dissipated, and Marco swooped down and landed beside the seriously injured Kazuki Oden, helping him up. He glared at Darren, and the blue-green phoenix flame spread from Marco's hand, healing the hideous blood hole where Kazuki Oden's arm was broken. Marco had already recognized Kazuki Oden and regarded him as a partner on the ship. And now Darren has crippled one of Kazuki Oden's arms, and Marco is so angry that he almost bites his teeth to pieces. However, when he saw Darren's face clearly from the drifting smoke, he was stunned. Wait, you are that Navy. The King of the North Sea. Killed Bondi Waldo's Navy. Marco took a breath. He suddenly remembered the meeting between his father and Roger not long ago. According to Roger's personal admission, it was this young Navy in front of him who made the former suffer a loss. It seems that my name has spread to the New World. At this time, Darren's white shirt was stained with blood, and there were several shocking scars on his body. He looked extremely tragic, and his lips were slightly pale. Marco. My sword. Yanma. Kazuki Oden opened his eyes with difficulty at this time, and the only remaining arm was covered with blood to grab Marco, his face anxious and desperate. Marco was stunned. But before he could say anything, a solemn and extremely murderous intention came to him. That Marine hasn't given up on killing Oden. Marco's face changed drastically. In the reflection of his pupils, such a picture appeared. The black-haired Marine raised his hand with a cold look, and with the blue arcs jumping in the void, the black demon sword hovering in the air suddenly trembled violently. Submit to me, Yanmo. Darren shouted coldly. The magnetic field that was almost violent and boiling gushed out of his body. Yanmo seemed to let out a shrill roar, and the slender and sharp blade trembled even more violently. Then, under Kazuki Oden's unbelievable eyes, his own sword, that destroying hell blade, was entangled in the arcs, and turned little by little. The pitch-black tip of the blade pointed directly at himself. I'll give it back to you now. The Commodore sneered with blood on his face. The magnetic field suddenly became violent. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 117. That's it. Zzzzz. The magnetic field suddenly went wild at this moment, and even in Marco's eyes, it seemed that the space around Darren became blurred. The force field, which was suppressed to the extreme, suddenly covered half of the island. The blue lightning visible to the naked eye jumped on the blade of Yan Mo, and then turned into an infinite exaggerated propulsion force, pushing this demon sword that was said to be able to destroy hell to roar out. Marco's pupils suddenly contracted, and his eye sockets were suddenly filled with bloodshot. So fast. In the perception of the observation hockey, under the propulsion of the violent magnetic field, Yanmo broke through the sound barrier almost instantly, constantly piercing the air, and blooming circles of white air waves. The terrifying speed and propulsion force made it carry the spiral air waves, pressing the earth to tear a gully in an instant. A cold suffocating feeling suddenly hit him. Marco glanced at the seriously injured Kazuki Odin, gritted his teeth, and took a step forward. This attack cannot be avoided. The blue-green flame instantly wrapped around his body, expanding into a huge round shield, stretching in front of him. Immortal Thistle. Swish. Yanmo, with his surging penetrating power, slammed into the giant shield of the immortal blue flame at an unimaginable speed, and penetrated through after only a moment of stalemate. Swish. One of the wings of the phoenix was cut off by Yanmo, and it flew upside down in the strong wind, and then turned into blue-green flames and dissipated in the void. Marco's face turned pale, and a blood mark oozed from the corner of his mouth. Although he had a nearly immortal recovery ability in the form of the phoenix, it was also at the cost of physical exhaustion. The attack of the Navy was so powerful that Yanmo rushed forward so fast that he didn't even have time to dodge. Boom. The violent sonic boom finally exploded, almost deafening. Marco breathed a sigh of relief. After all, he was saved. But the next second, his face suddenly changed. Because after tearing off his blue flame giant shield and wings, the black Yanmo didn't slow down at all, but instead continuously sprayed out white air waves from the tail due to acceleration like a rocket. At an incredibly amazing speed. It cut through hundreds of meters of sea all the way. Its target. Marco's eyes widened, and his mind was shaken violently. It's the Moby Dick. Dad. He roared with red eyes. The power of this move, if it hits the Moby Dick, I'm afraid the entire pirate ship will be cut in half in an instant. With the sharpness of Yanmo, plus the propulsion of Darren's magnetic field, Marco has no doubt about its power. On the Moby Dick. Looking at the black famous sword that was flying at high speed like a phantom, everyone in the Whitebeard pirates felt a chill on their backs. Don't underestimate our Whitebeard pirates. Diamond Joe's roared and stepped forward to intercept this attack. A broad and powerful hand grabbed his shoulder. The tall figure took a step forward and jumped high from the bow. The ignorant Navy kid. Whitebeard's eyes were full of anger and coldness, his bright golden hair fluttered in the fierce wind, and his wide white captain's coat fluttered. The huge sword was held in his hands, and a milky white halo wrapped around it. A fierce slash of the sword. I am Whitebeard. Amidst the thunderous roar, the magnificent sword hit the oncoming Yama squarely. Bang! The space seemed to be frozen under the power of the sword, and everything became slow. The roaring black demon sword was imprisoned in the void, and the blade continued to exhale black and red domineering energy, trembling violently. Whitebeard's eyes were stern, and the muscles of the arm holding the sword suddenly bulged, and the veins bulged. The white halo on the blade of the sword spread instantly. Crackling. As if glass was shattering, the entire space in front of him continued to produce thin white cracks. Boom. The heart-pounding dull vibration spread quickly, and the low roar was deafening in an instant. The sea and the land of the island began to shake violently, accompanied by a large number of bubbles gushing out of the sea, and the whole sea fell into a rage. Could it be? Seeing this scene, Marco's heart was pounding. He didn't care too much. He carried Kazuki Odin with one hand, and the blue flame wings spread out again and flew into the air. At the same time. Boom. Layer after layer of waves rose from the sea. Several meters. Dozens of meters. Hundreds of meters. The layers of surging waves were like roaring dragons, competing with each other, roaring and flooding towards the island. The momentum seemed to destroy the world. Boom! The raging tsunami fell on the deserted island like the Milky Way, and the surging waves washed away all obstacles on the road. The huge reefs, dense forests, and even the rolling small peaks were all crushed under the impact of this natural disaster-level tsunami. The entire island trembled violently at this moment, emitting a wail of unbearable weight, and the earth tore a huge crack of thousands of meters. Boom! On the Moby Dick, the people of the Whitebeard pirates looked at the small island that was constantly collapsing and sinking, turning into a swamp, and the expressions on their faces were all stunned. In the sky, Marco, who had barely escaped the impact range of the tsunami, carried Kazuki Odin, and looked at the island swallowed by the waves below with a shocked expression. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and muttered with a pale face. "Dad is angry." On the turbulent sea, Whitebeard, standing on the bow of the Moby Dick, narrowed his eyes and stretched out his hand to grab the black demon's sword hovering in the air in front of him. But at the moment of touching, he grabbed nothing. Driven by some invisible force, Yanmo flew back to the island at a very fast speed. Seeing this scene, Marco and others suddenly changed color. Could it be? That guy is not dead yet. That Navy is a devil fruit ability user. It is impossible to survive under the flooding of sea water. The next moment. Swish! A 3-meter-high black sphere suddenly shot up from the churning sea water. The dense layer of armed color domineering quickly faded, revealing the silver texture of the metal inside. The metal sphere then opened a hole, and then twisted quickly, revealing 2 figures inside, and condensed into a streamlined silver skateboard. The metal skateboard carried the 2 people and soared up at a very fast speed. The wind was fierce. Darren stood on the skateboard, one hand around Tien Yushi's slender waist. His eyes looked down at the Moby Dick on the sea in the distance, and laughed arrogantly. "Whitebeard pirates, is that it?" As soon as the voice fell, in the eyes of the Whitebeard pirates who were almost cracked and bulging with anger, the metal skateboard suddenly accelerated and soon sank into the clouds in the sky. The black Yanmo also followed closely behind. "Don't run." Marco gritted his teeth and wanted to catch up, but the severe pain and fatigue in his body came like a landslide. It was the sequelae of the knife just now. The physical strength was almost at its limit. "Forget it, Marco." Whitebeard's voice came in a low voice. His face was extremely ugly, and the veins on the hand holding the sword were bulging. "Let's not talk about whether Marco's speed can catch up with that kid. Even if he caught up, with Marco's strength, I'm afraid he won't be able to take advantage. Bring Odin back first." "Damn it." Marco gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. "Odin, how are you okay?" He turned his head to look at Kazuki Odin on his back. But the latter ignored him. Kazuki Odin looked at the direction where the Navy disappeared with a dazed look, as if he had lost his soul. For some reason, he always felt as if he had lost something very important. And that thing. It was not Yanmo. "Please ask for everything, thank you very much." Chapter 118. He reminded me of someone. Boom boom. The dull roar continued to come, gradually becoming lower. The Moby Dick was sailing on the surging sea, and the small island in the distance had been completely submerged by the sea level and no longer existed. This is the tremendous fighting power of the world's strongest man, Whitebeard. The full force of the tremor fruit is enough to with an exaggerated tsunami of thousands of meters high. Even some small islands will sink completely into the sea in the face of this natural disaster. The deck was in chaos. "Get the medicine quickly. Stop the bleeding. Bandage it immediately." As the ship doctor of the Whitebeard pirates, Marco anxiously directed other crew members to rescue Kazuki Odin lying on the deck. He released the resurrection blue flame in his hand, covering the wounds on the latter's body for treatment. Internal organ trauma caused internal bleeding, massive blood loss on the body surface, at least 10 bones were broken, ribs were comminuted, blood accumulated in the lungs, and the horrible wound of the broken arm. The more he checked Kazuki Odin's injuries, the uglier and more livid Marco's face became, and his heart gradually sank. The Marine's taijutsu was too straightforward and ruthless. Almost every strike was aimed at the enemy, without the slightest hesitation. Once he found a flaw, he would pursue and attack him relentlessly. If Odin had not been born different from ordinary people and had a much stronger physique than ordinary people, he would have been unable to withstand such a serious injury. How is he? Whitebeard came over at this time, his domineering eyes filled with worry. Marco's hands were burning with blue flames, and a layer of fine cold sweat had seeped out of his forehead. His face was pale, and he said hoarsely, "I'm out of danger, but Dad, that Navy's taijutsu." Whitebeard clenched his fists and sighed. That Navy kid was born in the most chaotic North Sea. He is a real madman who fought from the bottom. Before, I was surprised why a figure like Bondi Waldo fell into the hands of a Navy kid. Now it seems that maybe it's not just luck. He glanced at the injuries on Kazuki Odin's body. His taijutsu has the inheritance of the Orthodox Navy. You can vaguely see the shadow of Zephyr, but it is also mixed with insidious battlefield-killing skills. What's more tricky is that he has trained his body into a cold-killing machine. Although they were far apart, with Whitebeard's eyesight and observation haki, he almost saw the fight between Darren and Kazuki Odin. He was wounded but still grinned wantonly, looking for the enemy's flaws in the most dangerous moment of life and death, fighting like a hungry beast until the last drop of blood was shed. Fighting like a madman. This reminds me of a guy. Marco was stunned and asked subconsciously. Who? A shadow flashed in Whitebeard's eyes, and he said coldly. Shiki. The other members of the Whitebeard pirates were immediately silent. Shiki, nicknamed the Golden Lion, is a man who roars at the sea and dominates the world like a lion. This legendary pirate, who is on par with his father, has a combat power no less than his father, especially his ability of the float fruit, which makes his flying pirate fleet the most feared pirate group on this sea. The most terrifying thing is that once the Golden Lion really starts fighting, he will become a tireless, crazy beast just like his nickname. Even my father will have a headache if he faces him personally. Whitebeard exhaled a long breath. He looked at Kazuki Odin, who had fainted and kept muttering something, and said thoughtfully. Odin's strength is already very strong. In terms of haki, he is actually stronger than that Navy kid. It's just that he was born in Wano country and his life was too smooth in the past. With his strong body and swordsmanship talent, he may have the title of invincible in that closed country. But the samurai of Wano country are good at swordsmanship, not physical skills. In this way, it means that he has never fought with the real strong men in this sea, let alone the strong men who are good at close physical combat. He lost because of his lack of fighting experience. Darren, the Navy kid, seized this flaw. Hearing this, everyone in the Whitebeard pirates suddenly realized. They couldn't help but think of the scene when they first saw Odin at the port of Wano country not long ago. With his superb swordsmanship, Odin was able to fight his father to a draw at first. But when his father used physical skills, Odin was punched and flew thousands of meters away, and was defeated directly. The Navy. There is a ruthless man. Marco muttered solemnly. Having said that, the eyes of the Whitebeard pirates were full of anger. Odin was their recognized partner and family. They would never allow anyone to hurt their family. Even if that person was a genius of the Navy. At this time, a white seabird suddenly flew over the sky of the Moby Dick and dropped a scroll. Dad, the latest information. Flower Sword Vista picked up the scroll and tore off the wax seal on it. As one of the dominant forces in the New World, the Whitebeard pirates have a vast territory and interpersonal network. In addition to the main ship Moby Dick, there are dozens of affiliated pirate groups of various sizes in the periphery. Because of this, the Whitebeard pirates have established a rather large and complex intelligence network in the New World. Whenever something big happens in the sea, the intelligence network will pass on the information to Whitebeard in this relatively primitive way. After all, if you use electricity if they communicate with the chattering bug, there will be a risk of being monitored by the world government and the Navy. What happened? Whitebeard asked casually without even raising his eyes, looking at the unconscious Odin with a worried look. Dad, it's about that Navy. Flower Sword Vista suddenly took a breath, with disbelief in his voice. Everyone suddenly looked up at Vista. The latter's hand holding the intelligence was trembling slightly, and his face gradually became horrified. 8 days ago, Commodore Rogers Darren was captured alive by Kaido, who suddenly broke into the beasts while carrying out a mission against Douglas Barrett. 7 days ago, the Navy headquarters sent 4 high-end fighters, Sengoku, Garp, Zephyr, and Borsalino, to the New World to carry out a rescue operation. 1 day ago, Rogers Darren successfully escaped from the secret base of the Beast's pirates and destroyed most of the arsenal facilities. On the same day, the main force of the Navy arrived at the Beast's pirates' headquarters. The camp and the Beast's pirates fought a fierce battle. Except for Kaido, 2 big bosses and dozens of elites who escaped from the encirclement of the Navy, the remaining thousands of members of the Beast's pirates. Vista swallowed his saliva and said with difficulty. The whole army was wiped out. After the voice fell, everyone in the Whitebeard pirates was horrified. Please ask for everything, thank you very much. My eyes hurt so much, I have to go to the hospital for a checkup today. I have all kinds of problems with my body when I am old. Chapter 119 Taming Yanmo. The sun is bright and the shade is cool. On the beach of the island, the sea water beats the reefs on the shore rhythmically, piling up snow-white waves. Darren slowly opened his heavy eyelids, feeling that every muscle in his body was torn apart, and waves of overwhelming fatigue and pain kept coming. Why is it so heavy? He murmured, looking down, only to see a beautiful face lying on his chest, sleeping soundly. Mr. Darren, you will protect me, right? Tien Yushi was like a sleeping kitten, curling up her head in Darren's arms, turning her head from time to time, whispering softly. Mr. Darren is really handsome. No, Mr. Darren. Gently, gently. A faint blush stained her fair cheeks. Darren, so what kind of dream are you having? Ahem. Darren coughed lightly. With a beautiful woman in his arms, he was not calm. But after all, his body was seriously injured, and his shoulders were a little numb from the pillow. Tien Yushi moaned and slowly woke up. She opened her eyes like a little deer and met Darren's half-smiley eyes. The two looked at each other. Ah! Tien Yushi jumped up from Darren's arms as if she had been electrocuted, her face flushed. That, Mr. Darren, I'm so sorry. I was just too tired, and I fell asleep accidentally. She hurriedly explained, lowering her head and not daring to look at Darren's smiling eyes. Her eyes were dodging, and her slender fingers were placed in front of her, stirring unconsciously. Darren smiled and took a look at himself. The bandage was made by tearing his shirt apart. The bandage was tied in a rather rough way, and it looked messy, but it was tied with a bow at the end. It can be seen that Miss Tianyushi is not good at medicine. Tianyushi bit her lips shyly, blushing and hesitating. I. Seeing that she couldn't figure out what she was saying after a long time, Darren couldn't help laughing. Just kidding. Thank you for taking care of me, Miss Tianyushi. Tianyushi mustered up the courage to meet Darren's eyes, and said in a mosquito-like voice. Mr. Darren, just call me, Ashi. Darren nodded. Okay, Ashi, you can just call me by my name. He glanced at the surrounding environment. Ashi, how many days have passed now? Tianyushi exhaled lightly and said slowly. 1 day. 1 day. Darren fumbled around, took out a pack of cigarettes from his trousers, took out one and lit it. As the smoke floated up, Darren slowly fell into thought. He actually expected the battle with Kazuki Oden. What he didn't expect was that he almost killed that guy in the end. To be honest, apart from his amazing swordsmanship and domineering, Kazuki Oden's close combat skills seemed particularly unfamiliar. Perhaps this has something to do with the customs of Wano country. The customs and traditions of Wano country are similar to those of a country on Earth that lived a good life during the shogunate period. The nominal ruler of the country is the shogun, but the real controller is the daimyo of administrative regions at all levels. This country has a strict hierarchy, and the idea of loyalty to the emperor is deeply rooted in the mind and soul of every citizen. As the country's largest military group, the samurai implements the so-called Bushido spirit and is a violent tool for the ruler to control civilians. The samurai of Wano country are known for their powerful swordsmanship, which is known to the whole world, things he knew. But Kazuki Oden had never left this country before, let alone fought with a real taijutsu master, so he caught his weakness. It's a pity. Darren pinched his temple and shook his head with a smile. If the Whitebeard pirates hadn't arrived in time, he would have been able to complete the final kill. What's a pity, Mr. Darren? Tianyu Toki tilted his head and asked curiously. It's a pity that I didn't meet you earlier. With Darren's face, he said it without hesitation. Tianyu Toki blushed and his heart pounded. One fact that has to be admitted is that words like picking up girls depend on appearance. If Cake said this, the picture would probably be too beautiful. Darren suddenly seemed to remember something and waved his hand. Whoosh! A flash of black light suddenly shot out from the depths of the jungle, and the sharp air waves it carried plowed a long mark on the ground, and finally stopped steadily in front of Darren's eyes. The three-petal-shaped sword guard, the blade was branded with purple-black flame patterns, and the blade was cold and sharp. When Tien Yushi saw the sword, she shuddered subconsciously. I don't know if it was an illusion, she always felt that when the sword approached, a severe chill enveloped the surrounding space, and even the warm sunshine could not dispel it. Mr. Darren, this sword. Yanma, one of the national treasure-level swords of Wano country, a weird and powerful killing weapon. Darren narrowed his eyes and stared at the black long sword in front of him. He stood up slowly and raised his hand to untie the bow on the jump strap. Tien Yushi was anxious when he saw this. Mr. Darren, it's only been a day since you recovered from your injury. Don't force yourself. She suddenly widened her bright eyes, and her pink lips opened into an O shape. As the blood-stained bandage slid off Darren's body, his muscular body was immediately revealed. Like a cheetah with explosive power, his body covered with scars gave people a wild feeling and a strong sense of oppression. The wounds on his chest and waist had completely scabbed over, and even the edges showed fresh pink tender flesh. This. Tien Yushi couldn't believe her eyes. You'll get used to it in the future. Well, my physique is better. Darren blinked at her, and then ignored Tien Yushi, whose face was blushing again, and looked at Yanmo floating in the air again. Yanmo, known as, the sword that can destroy even hell. In the original plot, this sword will release the user's armament haki without authorization, and burst out with extremely terrifying power. But if it is used by an ordinary person, the haki will be absorbed by Yanmo and die. In the original plot, Zoro spent a lot of effort to tame this sword, and it shined in the final battle and became the King of Hell, in one fell swoop. In the previous battle, although he successfully used the power of the magnet fruit to drive this sword to fight, he did not really tame Yanmo. Then, now let's measure my capacity. Darren's eyes were filled with madness, and he stretched out his hand and suddenly grabbed Yanmo's handle. This chapter is a bit short, and my eyes can't stand it. After the hospital examination, I came back and found that I had conjunctivitis plus eye fatigue caused by excessive eye use, so I need to rest more. Chapter 120 Winning by Endurance. Yanmo's handle was cold to the touch, and the moment he touched it, Darren felt as if he was holding a piece of extremely cold ice crystal. Although all this was just some kind of illusion, waves of weird ghost howling suddenly sounded in the surrounding void. The temperature in the air seemed to drop to the freezing point, and there were gusts of cold wind under the fierce sunlight. Darren focused on the Yama in his hand. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Is there no change? Darren raised his eyebrows. But at the moment when this thought came out, a strange suction force suddenly came from the blade of Yama, which was almost unstoppable. Fuck. Darren's pupils suddenly contracted, and he even cursed in his heart. Under the mysterious suction force, he was shocked to find that the armed color domineering in his body really swarmed out uncontrollably. Without self-control, Darren's entire arm holding the knife was filled with a solemn black, and was completely covered by the armed color domineering. This is not over yet. Because after the armament haki covered his arm, the Yama in his hand was like a hungry shark smelling blood, making a shrill buzzing sound and madly absorbing Darren's haki. The black and red flames of the demon rose on the blade of Yama, and Darren's arm muscles rose and fell rhythmically, as if being sucked. This knife is wrong. Feeling that his armament haki was being absorbed by Yama like a tide, Darren's face changed. His armament haki training level is the weakest among all the physical data, with only 30 points, which can only be regarded as the stage of skilled use. After all, he has not been practicing armament haki systematically since he joined the training camp, 2 or 3 months later. In the previous battle with Kazuki Odin, he was extremely afraid of Kazuki Odin's slash because he suffered from the lack of armament haki. It can be said without hesitation that Darren's armament haki strength at this time is not even as strong as when Zoro obtained Enma in the original Wano Country plot. With Enma's absorption efficiency, it is estimated that his haki will be completely absorbed in less than 10 seconds. At this moment, from Darren's perspective, the Enma in his hand, which was surrounded by haki and emitted strange black and red flames, seemed to have turned into a bloodthirsty and greedy beast. It bit his arm and sucked blood from his body crazily. 5 seconds later, Darren's face began to turn pale. 8 seconds later, the muscles and skin of his right arm began to shrink visibly, and even the skin became shriveled, looking like a wrinkled dry wood. "Mr. Darren, how are you? Let go." Tien Yushi looked at the strange body changes with horror and couldn't help but exclaimed. "Let go." Darren's forehead was covered with cold sweat at this time, and his eyes were fixed on the Yama in his hand. But a crazy desire to win suddenly emerged in his eyes, and a wanton grin appeared at the corner of his mouth, which was very provocative. "Don't you want to absorb my domineering aura? Then I will feed you." After the voice fell, Darren shouted coldly. Some changes suddenly seemed to have taken place in his body. His shriveled right arm suddenly became full again, and it bloomed with a healthy color under the shining sweat. But his body was visibly thinner, and the cheekbones on his cheeks gradually protruded and became obvious. Life is returned. The secret of the 6 styles can only be used by the strong who fully master the 6 styles, which allows the user to perfectly control every part of the body. Like the devil fruit ability, the source of energy for the armed haki is physical strength. Darren, who has already cultivated his physique to the level of a monster, is naturally strong in physical strength. Although the strength of armed haki is still far behind that of a real strong man. But he has the best physique and the longest physical strength. In other words, at this time, Darren's armed haki may not be strong enough, but with the support of huge physical strength. It is beyond imagination. I want to see if you can suck me dry. The madness in Darren's eyes became more and more intense. He is such a person, with a kind of madness that never admits defeat in his bones. If someone punches him, he will kill them. It is this kind of stubbornness that allows him to persist in the hellish training that others cannot persist in, and he can kill the enemy in the fight that others cannot survive. So, one man and one sword are completely competing at this moment. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. As time went by, the ghostly aura burning on Yama became stronger and stronger, and its hissing sound seemed to change from the initial shrillness to unwillingness, then to helplessness, and finally even uttered a faint moan with a hint of joy. The blade seemed to be on fire, turning red, and the ghostly aura rose up like a huge torch. On the contrary, Darren's flesh and blood were constantly shrinking and shrinking, and his face bones were becoming deeper and deeper, looking like a traveler who had been dry for 10 days. His face was morbidly pale, his lips were cracked, and he looked extremely depressed. But his eyes were getting hotter and crazier, like a will-o'-the-wisp in his deep eye sockets, very scary. 40 seconds. 50 seconds. Time kept passing, but for Darren, every minute and every second of this short time of less than a minute was like hell, extremely tormenting. Finally. Buzz buzz buzz. As if it had reached the top of some kind of peak, the Yama in Darren's hand suddenly trembled violently. This tremor was different from the previous one with a feeling of resistance and escape, but a kind of trembling that could not be relieved after reaching the limit. The ghost energy turned into a black and purple torch, rising and burning on the blade raised high. Is it finally reached the limit? Darren's eyes burst into an unprecedented light, and he swung the knife vertically. Although he had fought with countless sword masters, he himself did not practice swordsmanship, and naturally did not understand any sword moves. This knife was swung out purely to follow the instinct transmitted by Yama. Even to Tianyu, Darren's movements were clumsy and awkward, no different from a child swinging a wooden stick to play house and fight. But with such a casual swing, the world in front of him suddenly fell into silence. It seemed as if something passed through the void. Tian Yushi's eyes widened, dumbfounded. Then, swish! Boom! A huge seawater column over 100 meters high separated and soared into the sky on both sides. A huge groove that was so deep that one could not see the bottom and even faintly saw the brown seabed spread all the way from Darren's feet to the end of his sight. The sea split open. Please be grateful for everything. Chapter 121 Flying Sword. Gurgle. Looking at the broken, after 3 seconds, the sea surface slowly closed again. Tian Yushi couldn't help swallowing her saliva and opened her mouth slightly. What kind of swordsmanship is this? She couldn't help turning her head and saw Darren, who was panting and haggard, and rushed forward with a worried look on her face to support his hand. This swordsmanship is called miracles with great strength. Darren pulled the corners of his mouth with difficulty, threw down the black demon sword in his hand weakly, sat on the ground, gasping for breath like a fish lacking oxygen. Bean-sized beads of sweat oozed and slid down his forehead, body and arms, his cracked lips even turned purple and blue, and a trace of blood slowly overflowed from the corner of his mouth. Mr. Darren, you are spitting blood. It's okay, I just overexerted myself. Darren tremblingly lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth and took a deep puff. Unprecedented weakness surged from every cell and every muscle in his body, making it difficult for him to even stand. It felt like he was not that uncomfortable even if he had been partying for 10 days and 10 nights without sleeping. He subconsciously sensed his physical data. Physique. 9.361, 78.712. Strength. 7.11, 70.001. Speed. 8.099, 70.391. Armament Hockey. 33.012. Conqueror Hockey. 51.001. Darren. Several black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead. The values in brackets are normal values in the original healthy state, and the values before brackets are the current state. Except for the Conqueror Hockey, which represents spirit, which has not changed, all other data have dropped to a point of weakness that has never been seen before. Especially the Armament Hockey, which has directly become 0. To sum it up in one sentence, he has been completely drained. Thinking of this, he looked at Yanmo on the ground with a ghostly look, and his mouth twitched slightly. This knife is too scary. As for the power caused by the knife just now, Darren was not too surprised. Yanmo swallowed such a huge amount of his domineering aura, and even almost completely drained his physical strength. It is quite normal for him to burst out with the destructive power of the great swordsman level. It's just a bit wasteful. Darren exhaled a puff of smoke and smoothed his messy hair. After all, he is not a swordsman who practices swordsmanship, and he knows nothing about swordsmanship. Such a huge amount of domineering aura and physical strength, it is too inefficient to use it to cut the sea. Here is the issue of energy efficiency. For example, if Darren uses physical skills to destroy a warship, he doesn't even need to use domineering aura, and he can stage an exaggerated scene of dismantling a warship with his bare hands. But if he were to use a sword to cut, he could only clumsily pour a lot of domineering energy into the sword, and then swing it out like a fire stick. A truly powerful swordsman can release more powerful power under the premise of releasing the same amount of domineering energy. This is the core of swordsmanship training. But, since I have a famous sword like Yanmo, shouldn't I practice swordsmanship? The moment this thought came out, Darren shook his head and rejected it. His talent in swordsmanship is extremely limited, which has been verified many times in the North Sea. In Sakaski's words, if he takes the path of swordsmanship, it would be purely a waste of time. Darren believes in Sakaski's judgment. Before getting the magma fruit, Sakaski was once a powerful swordsman. The judgment he made would never be wrong. His real strength is the most dangerous close combat. This point has been confirmed from the experience of the past few years, and gradually sorted out his personal style of physical training. It is undoubtedly an extremely stupid mistake to give up physical training to practice swordsmanship at this time. However, Darren waved his hand, and a weak arc of electricity emerged between his fingers. Yanmo slowly floated up from the ground. I don't know if it's an illusion, Darren always feels that after the release, just now, Yanmo's rejection and resistance to him don't seem so strong. He stared at the hell blade in front of him, and a playful smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Who said you can't use a sword if you don't know swordsmanship? Darren just hooked his finger lightly. Swish. Yanmo suddenly turned into a black fierce light, shot out from the original place at a very fast speed, and disappeared into the jungle in the distance. The black demon sword was like a phantom, constantly piercing the jungle repeatedly, turning into heavy sword shadows. A second later, Yanmo flew back again and hovered beside Darren. Then, in Tian Yushi's gradually widening eyes, strange noises were heard from the distant jungle. Smooth cuts appeared on the surface of the towering trees that several people could hug. The upper half of the giant trees slowly slid and tilted from the cuts, and finally collapsed with a creaking sound. A huge amount of dust flew up, and billowing smoke and dust raged. Looking around, the jungle within 100 meters has become bare, with only the clear rings of trees left, a huge tree stump, rooted in the earth. Ha 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 ha. Darren couldn't help but burst into laughter. I'm not practicing swordsmanship. I'm practicing the flying sword technique. The surging mood slightly dispelled Darren's sense of listlessness and weakness. He leaned back and lay on the scorching beach, feeling the breeze blowing from the sea, bathing in the sun, with a smile on his lips. His idea was not wrong. If the previous attack on the Moby Dick was an occasional flash of inspiration, then the experiment just now really confirmed his inner thoughts. It works. Compared to using ordinary metal or coins, after changing to a famous sword, the power of the metal attack he controlled increased by at least 5 times. Of course, a large part of the reason for this is the sharpness and penetration effects of Yanmo's big fast sword 21 works. After all, it is a demon sword that can cut Kaido. If it were replaced with an ordinary navy saber, I'm afraid the power would be far different from Yanmo. And if the famous sword is added with armed color domineering, its attack power is estimated to be able to reach a higher level. The only disadvantage of this, magnetic sword control, is that it requires extremely high development of devil fruits, and at the same time, it consumes more physical strength. After all, Darren must always accurately control the flight trajectory and blade angle of the flying sword. But is this the disadvantage of magnetic sword control? No, no, no. This is Darren's disadvantage. A touch of fiery madness emerged in Darren's eyes. This is just a Yanmo. If I get all 21 big swords, no, even the supreme big sword 12 works. Just think about that picture. As I raised my hands, several or even dozens of rare famous swords floated up behind me. Under the cover of armament hockey, it was completely dyed black, and then driven by the violent magnetic field, it attacked the target at an explosive speed several times or even dozens of times the sound barrier. Fuck. If I had known, I would have fought for my life and snatched the aim no happy slash. Darren's eyes were red, and he couldn't help but grit his teeth. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 122, Sorting Out the Combat System. But this is just a thought. It was extremely difficult to cut off Kazuki Oden's arm and take away his Yama. Not to mention that Marco, who possessed the mythical beast-type phoenix fruit, was protecting him closely, and Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, was watching from a distance. Although the invincible warrior has not reached the level of Admiral now, he is very close. If it weren't for his lack of experience in fighting with strong physical masters, he might not have taken any advantage. Besides, the current Kazuki Oden is far from reaching the peak period of slashing down the giant dragon Kaido with one sword, in the original plot. From this point of view, the time when Kazuki Oden really ushered in a leap in strength was when he was in the Whitebeard Pirates and the Roger Pirates. Especially during the Roger Pirates' final voyage around the Grand Line, he learned the entanglement of the Conqueror's haki, and his strength has since entered the threshold of the Admiral-level combat power, becoming one of the few peak-strong men in this sea, in Kaido's words. It will be difficult to deal with it when we meet next time. Thinking of this, Darren subconsciously murmured softly and clenched his fist subconsciously. In terms of talent alone, Kazuki Oden, who has been in constant turmoil since birth, is definitely better than himself. Like those so-called natural kings, Oda gave him an extraordinary fixed-frame personality in order to shape him. He was born with physical abilities that ordinary people don't have. He threw his nanny out before he was 1 year old. At the age of 2, when other children could only learn to walk, he could catch 2 rabbits at the same time, showing his amazing leg strength. At the age of 4, when other children were playing in the mud, he could lift a huge rock and throw it to kill a giant bear. At the age of 6, his body had already matured and he began to go to the red light district. Although this innate strong physical talent is not as good as the natural destroyer, Big Mom Charlotte Linlin, it is also different from ordinary people. Unparalleled talent. After this setback, Kazuki Oden will definitely take it as a warning. Even if he doesn't wake up, with Whitebeard's vision, he will remind him 1 or 2 and help him with targeted training as much as possible. This also means that the next time he meets him, it will probably be more difficult. As for the broken arm, it is estimated that it will not have much impact on Kazuki Oden. After all, broken arms are too common in this sea. But a truly strong person will minimize the impact of a broken arm on his own strength. But having said that, next time we meet, do you really have the courage to attack me, Kazuki Oden? Darren's mouth suddenly curled up. Kazuki Oden has been making progress, but how can he slack off? The most important thing is. Darren looked at Yanmo floating in front of him, and his smile became more intense. After this time, he has gradually sorted out a unique combat system of his own. Close combat composed of strong physique, domineering and superhuman skills. Magnetic sword control is a combat supplement for medium and long-range and large-scale attacks. Complementing each other, completely filling the gap in the past. The shortcoming of the Devil Fruit ability is insufficient attack. Next, just practice step by step, increase the strength of the domineering, collect more famous swords, and add them to your magnetic sword control combat system. I believe that it won't be long before I can step into the combat power of the general level. Gurgle. Just as Darren was pondering, a sound of stomach drumming suddenly sounded. He raised his head and saw Tien Yushi's blushing face. He couldn't help but smile and said softly. Sorry, it's my negligence, Ashi. You have been busy taking care of me all day, you must be hungry, right? Tien Yushi bit his lower lip gently and shook his head. I'm not hungry. Gurgle. The sound of her stomach made her pause, and the blush immediately flew to the crystal-clear ears. Darren laughed. He hooked his finger lightly. The Yama in front of him suddenly shot out and sank silently under the sea without even a splash. Mr. Darren, this is... Tien Yushi opened her beautiful eyes wide with curiosity. Before she finished her words, Yama shot out from the sea again and flew back to Darren. However, compared with before, there were several white sea fish on the blade of Yama at this time, and their tails kept flapping, reflecting a charming luster in the sun. Is this all right? Tien Yushi's eyes sparkled, and she covered her mouth with one hand. Isn't this knife a rare and famous knife in the world? Darren picked up a few stones skillfully, built a bonfire, and smiled. Do you like sashimi or cooked food? Tien Yushi thought for a moment, tilted his head and said. I can do both. Then make some of both. Darren separated some metal from the silver skateboard stuck on the beach not far away, and made 2 dinner plates and 2 pairs of chopsticks. Immediately, under Tien Yushi's surprised eyes, he skillfully gutted the sea fish, put 2 of them on the bonfire, and cut the other 2 into fish fillets for sashimi. Although there are no seasonings, there is no strange radiation and pollution in the sea of this world. The best seafood ingredients often only need the simplest cooking method to stimulate the most natural taste of the ingredients themselves. Please eat, my beautiful lady. Darren smiled and served the grilled fish and sashimi, and acted like a senior chef, doing a, please, etiquette, which made Tian Yushi smile with curved eyebrows. Thank you, Mr. Chef Darren. Ten Yushi said with a smile, and then adjusted the hem of her kimono. She knelt down in front of Darren with a decent posture, looking like a well-educated lady. She stretched out her fair and slender arms, picked up a piece of fish with chopsticks, and then put it into her mouth and chewed it gently. Soon her eyes narrowed with a comfortable expression. It tastes good. Compared to her elegance and decency, Darren was much rougher. He picked up several pieces of sashimi with a chopstick and stuffed them into his mouth, swallowing them whole without chewing them a few times. With his body extremely weak, he needed to replenish his energy as soon as possible. After eating a whole fish, Darren's face was finally not as pale as before, and a little blood color appeared. He slowly exhaled and asked casually. "Ah she, aren't you afraid of me?" Tian Yushi looked at the Commodore in front of him with gentle eyes, smiled and shook his head and said, "Mr. Darren, are you referring to the scene of fighting with those pirates before? You were protecting me, how could I be afraid? Please thank you for everything." Chapter 123 Heroes vs. Scum. Besides, aren't those people pirates? I don't have any good feelings towards pirates. Tian Yushi bit her chopsticks gently and looked at Darren calmly. In the countless journeys through time and space in the past 800 years, she has seen scenery that ordinary people have never seen in their lives. The changes of the times, the changes of the years, the ups and downs of the sea, the destruction and rebirth of countries, the ever-changing situation of the world. But one thing is certain, no matter in which era, pirates are synonymous with chaos and plunder. Not to mention that she was deceived by pirates and traffickers when she first came to this era, and was almost sold as a slave. With all these factors added up, Tianyushi naturally had no good impression of pirates. What a girl with a very positive outlook. Darren's eyes lit up slightly, and he couldn't help but sigh. Originally, he was worried that Tianyushi would have different ideas about Kazuki Oden because of the influence of the world line. I had to spend some time to convince her, but I didn't expect Tianyushi to be so sensible, which saved a lot of effort. Aren't you afraid that I am also a bad guy, Ashi? Darren said with a smile. No, I'm not afraid, Mr. Darren. Tianyushi said with a smile, then lowered his head slightly, and whispered shyly. And Mr. Darren is so handsome, how could he be a bad guy? Darren was stunned and laughed. He really didn't expect this reason. But on second thought, it was very reasonable. On one side is the tall and handsome Navy man who rescued you from the human traffickers, on one side was a pirate who was swollen like a pig, stupid and reckless like a monster. Who to choose and who to trust was obvious at a glance. It's just that Mr. Darren, the guy who calls himself Kazuki Oden. I see that the clothes he wears seem to be the clothes of Wano country. At this time, Tianyushi suddenly remembered something and couldn't help asking. You must have been holding back this question for a long time, right, Ashi? Darren looked at Tianyushi with interest. The latter clenched his fists, feeling a little embarrassed that his heart was exposed, and nodded with a red face. Yes. Her goal of traveling through time and space was to go to the future Wano country. She finally met a person wearing a samurai costume, so she naturally couldn't help but be curious and pay more attention. But before that, she vaguely felt that Darren seemed to be full of hostility towards Kazuki Oden, so she didn't dare to ask. Now as the two gradually became familiar with each other and opened up the conversation, she stammered and asked this question hidden in her heart. However, to Tianyushi's surprise, Darren smiled frankly and said, Yes, that guy is indeed from Wano country. He did not intend to deceive Tianyushi. Although Ashi seemed weak on the surface, he was actually strong and smart. If he concealed too much, once she found out, she might not say anything on the surface, but she would definitely lose trust in him in her heart. Instead of doing this, it is better to tell the truth frankly. Women hate men cheating on them the most. No matter in which world, this is an irrefutable truth. So is a man, either be sincere enough or cheat to the end. But Darren does not like to cheat on the woman he likes. Kazuki Oden, the heir of the Kazuki clan of Wano country, the daimyo of Kuri of Wano country, is born with a strange appearance and powerful strength. Darren smiled openly and patiently told Tianyu. He is a man with a strong spirit of adventure. He has disdained worldly rules since he was a child. He has no attachment to fame, wealth, power in his country. He is devoted to adventure at sea and see a wider world. But as I told you before, Wano country has been in a policy of closing the country for many years, and its contact with the outside world is almost zero. The citizens of Wano country are strictly prohibited from going to sea. So, Kazuki Oden finally decided to give up. He abandoned his family, status, people, and even the country, boarded the ship of the Whitebeard pirates, and became a free pirate. In general, Kazuki Oden is a chic, independent, and carefree person. In Wano country, those who hate him almost hate him to the core, and there are countless people who admire him, treating him as a natural hero. And I believe you have guessed that the reason why he appeared on that island at that time was because he heard your call. He came to save you. At this point, Darren noticed that Tianyu's eyes flashed for a moment, which confirmed his statement. Then, after talking about the invincible hero, Kazuki Oden, let's talk about me. Darren smiled indifferently and took out a cigarette to light it. As the sea breeze blew the smoke and face, he rarely talked about his past. I was born in the North Sea, the most chaotic of the four seas. I had no extraordinary talents since I was a child. I started as an ordinary naval private and climbed up step by step to my current status and power. In order to gain strength, I trained harder than anyone else, often vomiting blood. For military merit and promotion, I did not hesitate to use any means to deal with pirates and enemies. I once slaughtered a mafia family of thousands of people overnight, and also used despicable means to assassinate nobles and politicians who opposed me. In addition to my public position, I also control underground forces in a large area of the sea through various channels. My legal income is countless every day, and I can't even remember the women I have slept with. The nobles tremble under my intimidation, and pirates are almost extinct in the sea area under my jurisdiction. And it is precisely for this reason. The crime rate under my rule is unexpectedly low and terrifying. I am cruel, greedy, ruthless. I will never let any enemy go, and of course I will never betray my friends. On the edge of the island, next to the bonfire. In the smoky face of the Commodore, a pair of deep eyes are full of memories. The whole world is terribly quiet. Only the waves beat against the reefs, and the sound of the waves keeps echoing. Ashi, you will soon find out that I, Rogers Darren, am not a good person. Apart from those glorious military exploits and the so-called monster, most people on this sea will call me the biggest scum of the Navy, in their hearts. At this point, Darren raised his mouth with some self-mockery, turned his head to look at the kimono woman who was kneeling next to him and listening quietly, and smiled. Do you regret it now? You didn't choose Kazuki Oden, the hero, praised by everyone, but chose me, a scum. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 124 I'm so good. The cool sea breeze blew away the white mist of the cigarette, and the voice of the Commodore slowly disappeared in the sound of the waves. Darren kept a calm smile on his face, quietly looking at Tianyushi's face. Guo Qingcheng's charming face waited for her answer. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then, under Darren's slightly stunned expression, Tianyushi's face gradually showed a gentle smile. No, Mr. Darren, I have no regrets. Her eyes gradually lit up, and she looked at Darren with burning eyes. Father once said that a man who stands tall and upright never hesitates to talk about his bad deeds in life and never hides his own shortcomings. You can say to me calmly, I'm not a good person, which is enough to prove your sincerity to me and your inner openness. You are not stingy in praising even the enemy, severely criticizing yourself, and dare to admit your mistakes and shortcomings. Such you are a real hero. Her voice was loud and clear, revealing an unquestionable firmness. Darren was stunned for a moment. This is also okay. He couldn't help but stare at Tianyushi's eyes, trying to see if she was joking. Darren. Tien Yushi. Darren. The corners of his mouth twitched, and his expression froze. He took a deep breath, tried his best to keep calm and graceful on his face, and said in a muffled voice. Well, you make a lot of sense. But it seemed as if there were 10,000 grass mud horses running through his heart. Me. A real hero. Are you sure you were right? When I said this, even I wanted to laugh. But looking at Tien Yushi's serious and confident expression as if he saw through his heart, Darren opened his mouth and couldn't say a word of rebuttal. If you didn't say it, I wouldn't know I was so good. It should be said that the people of Wano country have some problems with their brain circuits. But it's better this way, it saves a lot of trouble. Okay. Darren pinched his temple helplessly, and had to put on an appearance of, you actually saw through me, and smiled bitterly. You have a rich imagination, but I promise you, I will do my best to help you return to Wano country. Tien Yushi shook his head and smiled softly. It's okay, Mr. Darren. She looked at Darren with eyes that seemed to be shining like stars. Since the current situation in Wano country is so tense, it must be difficult for even the Navy to intervene, right? Just follow your original steps and do what you should do. I'm not in a hurry. Look at it. What a gentle and considerate girl. Even though Darren has always been, cold and ruthless, he couldn't help but be moved by Tien Yushi's understanding at this moment. The situation in Wano country may not be as troublesome as we imagined. And it is inconvenient for the Navy to intervene in some things, but it does not mean that I cannot. Darren thought for a few seconds and smiled slowly. Since Kazuki Oden has already gone to sea, it also means that there is no one in Wano country who can stop him. As for Kazuki Oden's retainers, the powerful samurai who were later called 9 heroes, are not to be feared at all. So maybe we can plan for this country. He has been coveting the rich seastone mineral resources in Wano country for a long time. If Wano country can be taken into his pocket, he can completely monopolize the seastone output resources in the world. Not to mention that in addition to a large amount of mineral resources, many samurai families in Wano country also have secret and precious inheritances. For example, the historical text engraving and interpretation methods of the Kazuki family, and the sword forging technology of the Shimotsuki family. The Navy dare not touch Wano country, not to a large extent because of the problem of combat power, but political factors. After all, because of the seastone resources, the world government has maintained a long-term cooperative relationship with Wano country. If the Navy mobilizes troops against Wano country on a large scale, it will not conform to its concept of peace and justice. First, after all, it involves interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. Secondly, it will also cause unnecessary conflicts with the world government, its immediate superior. Wano country has always been a hot potato for the Navy. But Darren is different. He will not care about so many things. Even if the world government holds him accountable, he has enough strength to challenge them now. It's just a matter of dividing the spoils. He is good at this. I just don't know if Kaido's power has intervened in Wano country. Darren frowned and whispered softly. The top priority is to get in touch with the Navy's large forces, obtain more intelligence, and then heal his injuries and return to his prime as soon as possible before considering the problem of Wano country. We should be almost there. When I was at the hotel, I had clearly left a message with the headquarters, giving my approximate coordinates. Even if the Navy was slow, they should have found me. At this time, Tien Yushi next to him suddenly pointed to the sea in the distance with surprise. Mr. Darren, look. That looks like a Navy ship. As soon as he finished speaking, a dazzling light suddenly rose from the void behind Darren. Countless golden photons gathered from all around, and soon formed a tall figure. A yellow and white striped suit, a round hat on his head, and a wide white cloak fluttering gently in the sea breeze. Tien Yushi saw the man's face clearly, took 2 steps back in fear, and hid behind Darren. This guy looks so wretched. Huh. The man pushed up his exaggerated frog sunglasses with his index finger, looked at Tien Yushi with a strange expression, and then stroked his chin with interest, and said to Darren with a smile. We spent so much effort looking for you all over the sea, but I didn't expect you to be here on vacation. Brigadier General Darren. I haven't been idle for a minute. Darren smiled, and when he heard this familiar, slow voice, he somehow felt an inexplicable sense of security in his heart. But you, when I was imprisoned by Kaido, I imagined all the time that you would appear from the sky to rescue me. He turned around and looked at the face that deserved a beating with a half-smile. It's a pity that you are still late as always, Major General Borsellino. Borsellino shrugged helplessly. Well, how should I put it? I always feel that you don't need others to save you. Look, you proved my idea. By the way, I almost forgot to say. Because of your actions and the information you provided, the headquarters of the Beast Pirates has been completely wiped out. Except for Kaido himself and a very small number of pirates who escaped, the Beast Pirates were completely wiped out. He grinned. Congratulations, Major General Darren. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 125 Three Old Men with No Martial Ethics. Kaido's hometown was destroyed. When Darren heard the news, he was stunned for the first time. As for his promotion from Brigadier General to Major General, he didn't care too much. Although social skills are important, this sea is ultimately based on strength. With his own strength, promotion is a matter of time. You don't look very happy. Borsellino looked at Darren's thoughtful expression and smiled. In such a short time, he went from colonel to major general, completing a triple jump. It's really an unprecedented promotion speed. He has caught up with me in terms of military rank. He touched the stubble on his chin. I guess Sakazuki is having a headache now. Darren frowned tightly. No, Borsellino, what I'm thinking now is, since the base has been destroyed and the coordinates have been exposed, where did Kaido escape to? Borsellino glanced at Darren and shrugged, who knows? Kaido is a legendary creature that can fly. If he wants to hide his tracks, who can find him in this sea? Darren raised his eyebrows. A vague idea seemed to pass through the depths of his mind, but it flashed and he couldn't catch it. But it is said that when he was in the Rocks Pirates, Kaido and Big Katakana Mom had a good relationship. Borsellino scratched his head and said, could he have gone to Big Katakana Mom? Unlikely. Darren shook his head. With Kaido's character, he would never be willing to be inferior to others. Not to mention that once the two monsters meet, they will probably fight to the death. Could it be? He looked up at Borsellino and was slightly stunned. What are you laughing at? Borsellino raised his hands in surrender. I'm not laughing. Looking at the guy's expression of watching a good show, Darren had a bad premonition in his heart and gritted his teeth and said, you obviously laughed. Okay, are you ready to explain your disappearance in the past 2 days? Borsellino pointed to the direction of the sea with a teasing smile. Darren looked in the direction he pointed, and the scene that came into his eyes made him want to run away. On the sea, the solemn warships had already docked, and several burly figures jumped off the warships impatiently and walked over with momentum. I don't know if it was an illusion, but Darren seemed to see that their eyes seemed to glow red. The corners of his mouth could not help but twitch. No way. Before he finished speaking, a series of loud and furious voices sounded like thunder. Darren, you stinky boy. Where have you been these 2 days? If you are not dead, report it quickly. Do you know that we have searched almost all the dozens of nearby islands in the past 2 days to find you? Darren's eyes twitched as he looked at the three people, Zhongguo, Zephyr and Garp, who were surrounded by him step by step, with a sense of oppression and twisting their fingers. For the first time in his life, he was a little panicked. That, Zephyr teacher, General Zhongguo, Vice Admiral Garp. Please listen to my quibbling, no, listen to my explanation. But the three Zephyrs who were full of anger did not listen to him at all. White smoke came out of their nostrils, and they surrounded him with gritted teeth. 3 huge fists blew a strong wind and quickly enlarged in Darren's pupils. These old bastards who don't follow martial ethics. Darren cursed madly in his heart, and suddenly a light bulb went off in his head. He shouted out in a hurry. Because I fought with the Whitebeard pirates. Boom. 3 fists stopped in front of Darren's eyes at the same time, and the sharp wind from the fists made the muscles on the latter's face ripple. What did you say? Zephyr's eyes widened. He said he fought with the Whitebeard pirates. Garp turned his head and yelled into Zepha's ear. I'm not deaf. Why are you yelling so loudly? Zepha's forehead was bulging with veins, and he turned his head and scolded Garp. You are the one who kept asking, I'm just reminding you kindly. Garp picked his nose and muttered in dissatisfaction. Zepha clenched his fist tightly, C#D. No. Zongguo looked at the two low IQ guys with a frown on his face, pinched his temples, squinted at Darren, and said in a serious tone. Darren boy, are you sure you are not kidding? A drop of cold sweat slid down Darren's forehead. He nodded cautiously. With his current weak physical condition, he could not withstand the beating of these old guys. The most important thing is that Zongguo is fine, but Garp and Zepha did not hit him hard. If he was beaten up by them, he would have to rest for at least one more day to fully recover from his injuries. Yes, well, it was purely an accidental encounter. Darren looked at the three angry old men in front of him and did not behave too much. After all, these three old men left their military duties and came to the New World thousands of miles away to save him. From the tiredness and dusty state on their faces, it can be seen that they really worried about themselves. So Darren said honestly. I broke the arm of one of Whitebeard's, well, sworn brothers, and almost killed him. Then in order to create an opportunity to retreat, I launched an attack on the Moby Dick, but unfortunately it was blocked. Well, then Whitebeard went crazy. He launched the power of the tremor fruit, set off a tsunami, and sank an island into the sea. I didn't. I finally escaped with serious injuries. At this point, Darren smiled proudly at the stunned Garp, Zephyr and Sengoku. Darren. B.D. Sengoku. Zeph. Garp. The next second. You think the mess you made is not big enough, right? Sengoku roared with pain on his face. Whitebeard, that's Whitebeard. The most protective and threatening New World pirate overlord. And, Garp, Zephyr, you two bastards shut up. Still laughing. Sengoku turned his head in a rage, staring at Zephyr and Garp who were standing with their hands on their hips and laughing with their heads raised. Zephyr, ha 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 ha, you are worthy of being my student. Garp, ha 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 ha, you are worthy of being my chosen adjutant. Sengoku. He almost bit his teeth to pieces. First it was Bondi Waldo. Then it was Roger. Then it was Kaido. And now it's Whitebeard. He covered his head madly, staring at Darren with red eyes. Are you going to provoke all those legendary pirates? So who's next? Big Mom? Or Wang Ji, John? Or even Golden Lion? Darren thought after hearing this. Well, this. You really think about it. Zongguo's fury resounded throughout the island. I'm grateful for everything.